MSPs hearing about it in their surgeries.
Thank you. That concludes topical questions, and we now move to the next item of business, which is a statement by Richard Lockhead on an update on the reform of the Common-Fisheries-Policy. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and there should therefore be no interventions or interruptions whilst he is making the statement. I call on Richard Lockhead. Cabinet Secretary, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Could we have the Cabinet Secretary's microphone, please? Thank you.
I'll just say I'm grateful for the opportunity to make this statement updating members on reform of the Common Fisheries Policy before Parliament rises for the summer recess soon. Following intense negotiations, the European Parliament and Council have reached historic political agreements on both the basic regulation of the CFP and the regulation addressing the common organisation of the market for fisheries. These agreements still remain to be ratified, but few, if any, further changes are expected. Formal adoption by the Council and the European Parliament is expected either next month or at the latest this autumn. Before the end of this year, we also expect agreement on a new European Maritime and Fisheries Fund, which will underpin the reformed CFP with financial support. I can confirm that, working within the constraints we face, our key priorities appear to have been achieved. We have a better framework to support sustainable fishing and protect fish stocks. We have an ambitious but workable discards package to phase out discards, the scandal of discards, and we have secured a regional approach to fisheries management, bringing at long last, hopefully, key decisions much closer to home. In true EU fashion, of course, the CFP reform negotiations have been slow, tortuous and bureaucratic. Nevertheless, we have seen this process as a golden opportunity for radical reform to be grasped with both hands, given how badly the CFP has failed our fishing communities, our fish stocks and, of course, the wider marine environment. And I can say to the Chamber, our fishers, of course, are not short of challenges. Only last week I chaired a meeting with the industry to try to address the acute pressures facing our nephrops fishery as a result of biological changes in the prawn grounds. We're now working on an action plan to attempt to alleviate these pressures where we can, but this acutely demonstrates why we do need a CFP which supports our fishers when they're facing these kind of biological challenges, never mind the bureaucratic challenges, rather than hindering them at every turn. Of course, the agreement now reached is a product of compromise and was never going to fulfil all our wishes. We've had to negotiate with the diverse views of 754 MEPs and 27 member states, and on a number of occasions we've had to fight for Scotland's interests within the UK Government. For example, in ensuring that a strong position was maintained on transferable fishing quotas, known as ITQs, and also on regionalisation. But although not perfect, I believe the deal on the table has potential to move us substantially forward. In short, it should allow us, if we realise the opportunities it offers, to take its significant strides forward in developing a sensible and sustainable fisheries management framework for the whole of Europe. And we are a nation whose identity, culture, heritage and, of course, economy are shaped by the seas that surround us. Seas that have long provided for our people and which now support an industry catching more than 70% of the UK's key quota stocks, providing over 5,000 coastal jobs and contributing £500 million to Scotland's economy. So that's why I was determined that Scotland's voice was heard very loudly during this reform process, ensuring that regionalisation, discards and the commitment to sustainable fishing were key features of the final agreement. Reducing micromanagement from Brussels and returning greater responsibility for fisheries to Scotland has been, of course, my main priority from the start. That's why I exerted significant energy in ensuring the UK position stayed firm on our key objective of decentralising the one-size-fits-all CFP. And after all, without that, we would not have had the tools to do the job of moving to a discard-free fishery to ensure we're fishing at sustainable levels. And I am pleased to report that a regional approach to fisheries management has now been agreed, and we have to accept that as historic. It perhaps doesn't go as far as I would like, and time will tell to what extent it really will loosen Brussels' grip on management of our fisheries, but I, for one, will work to make it a success. The agreed model should give Member States more flexibility to manage their own fisheries by working regionally to develop detailed management measures, in consultation, of course, with our key stakeholders, to deliver the high-level objectives which will be agreed at European level and set out in multi-annual plans. The Commission will then be expected to legislate to enable implementation of the actions agreed at regional level, to monitor progress and then support Member States in achieving these high-level targets. For example, with the agreement of Member States in the region and the support of the Commission, we could establish our own rules for determining days at sea or fixing the composition of catches, which of course, again, would enable us to cast off the hated straitjacket of the cod recovery plan. Crucially, this framework will focus on achieving outcomes by whatever routes Member States believe are necessary, rather than the current inflexible fixation from Brussels of micromanaging the whole process down to the size and width of nets, as of course witnessed through the current one-size-fits-all approach of the CFP. Key amongst those outcomes is the commitment to achieving discard-free fisheries. Hopefully, an end is now in sight to the absolute scandal where perhaps 1 million tonnes of fish or more per year are discarded in Europe's waters. That's an objective which we, the industry and our environmental groups, all agree on, that dumping perfectly edible fish is ecological madness and absolutely horrendously wasteful. But it's a complex and challenging issue to tackle, and that's why it's important to negotiate a discard ban which is both ambitious but also workable for fishermen and managers, particularly in Scotland's mixed fishery. So from January 2015, the discard ban will commence for all pelagic species, while the ban for other stocks, including nephrops, cod, haddock and whiting, for instance, will be phased in between January 2016 and 2019. Importantly, the discards package is supported by a number of measures to aid practical implementation. Firstly, vessels will be able to bank or borrow up to 10% of additional quota in a stock from one year to the next. They will also be allowed to transfer up to 9% of quota from a target species to cover any unwanted bycatch of another species, although only if the non-target species is within safe biological limits. Additionally, there are exemptions for some species which are more likely to survive after being discarded, such as skates and rays, and for species which cannot be caught and landed, such as sharks. Importantly, a maximum de minimis level of discarding will also be permitted, reducing from 7% of total annual catch in years 1 and 2 to 6% in years 3 and 4, and thereafter at 5%. But this will be allowed only for species agreed at European level and where justified on the grounds that total elimination of discards is either unachievable for scientific reasons or for disproportionate cost reasons to the industry. Finally, and importantly, as Scotland demanded, the discards package includes provision for an uplift in quotas. This is absolutely necessary in our view as we move from quotas being based on what is landed to quotas being based on what is taken out of the sea in the first place. This also means that vessels can benefit from landing much of what would have otherwise been discarded. So this anti-discards package will be challenging for a complex mixed fishery in Scotland. It will mean moving to yet more new methods of fishing and more selective gear. But we have some time to make the transition, and it's a change that I firmly believe is both desirable and deliverable, not only environmentally but also from an economic perspective. It's simply inefficient to catch unwanted fish that has to be thrown back over the side. By avoiding that, we can add to both the environmental and the economic bottom line. Of course, to their huge credit, our fishermen here in Scotland already have a strong track record of achievement on tackling discards, and we will continue to work with them to make good on this new commitment. Moving to discard-free fisheries based on catches rather than landings will also help us to achieve our other key goal, to fish our stocks at what is referred to as maximum sustainable yield, that is, at a rate that allows the stock to reproduce. It's important that fisheries management follows the best available science and is not driven by short-term self-interest or political objectives. I'm therefore very pleased that the reform agreement recognises the need to set fishing levels which will rebuild depleted stocks and maintain them at sustainable levels, thereby sustaining the fishing communities that of course depend upon these stocks. These limits will be applied by 2015 where possible and by 2020 at the latest for all harvested stocks. In Scottish waters, we already fish at these levels across many of our commercial stocks, and in time that will lead to better and bigger stocks in more stable, plentiful seas. Finally, I want to remind colleagues that we successfully fought off the unacceptable elements of the Commission's original proposals, namely to establish a mandatory system of transferable fishing rights across Europe, which posed a direct threat to our historic fishing rights here in Scotland. I hope we all believe in this chamber that our fishing rights belong to Scotland and must not be sold to those with the deepest pockets anywhere in Europe. We fought vigorously against that from day one, and we had to show forceful leadership, not only to overcome a threat from Brussels, but also to bring the UK Government to see sense on that particular issue, but we welcomed their volte-face. I'm pleased our work has paid off, and now we can move on to better debates. Our fishermen not only face a daily struggle while at sea, but also with the bewildering and often contradictory tangle of European regulations. The existing CFP has been no friend to Scotland and will no doubt continue to often make life challenging for our fishing industry. But I believe a door has been opened to better times with this reform. We might not have the giant leap forward that we all wanted to see here in Scotland, but it's certainly a big step forward and we should welcome that. The Scottish Government will continue to work in close partnership with stakeholders and the industry, both onshore and offshore, to ensure that we maximise the potential of this fantastic industry, protect our amazing marine environment and our rich fish stocks, and bring benefits to all those connected with our fishing communities in this country.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement, and I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question were to press the request to speak buttons now, and I call Claire Baker.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I would like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for an advance copy of his statement. Last month's agreement on the basic regulation of the Common-Fisheries-Policy is to be welcomed. We have seen good progress around discards and regional control of fisheries, which, if implemented sensibly, will benefit Scottish fishing and help secure a sustainable future. Within the UK, the Cabinet Secretary has played his part, but I also welcome the work of the European Parliament and Council in securing sensible agreement. Ensuring that the fish stocks are at a healthy level is not just beneficial to the environment, but also to our fishing industry. Achieving maximum sustainable yield via the best scientific advice is vital to ensuring a sustainable future. While the final agreement contains a strong commitment to following scientific advice and an end to overfishing, there is no clear deadline for when full stock recovery will be achieved. Can the Cabinet Secretary therefore say how the regionalisation aspect of the CFP will aid stock recovery in Scotland, and whether clear timetables for the achievement of full stock recovery will be set at a regional level, or whether that would be limited by multi-annual plans?
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Claire Baker for comments and the way in which she's approached this very important issue. Firstly, one way in which regionalisation should help stock recovery is the fact that under the one-size-fits-all approach from Brussels, many of the measures are counterproductive. Often, for instance, we force vessels into where the juvenile fish are that we're trying to allow to grow, as opposed to other areas of the sea, and that's down to ill-fitting regulations from Brussels. And hopefully, if these details are decided at a more regional and local level, then we'll get them right and we won't have these counterproductive consequences for fisheries conservation. And in terms of the targets, of course, laid down, they will be in the multi-annual plans which will be agreed between the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. But hopefully, and of course what we take from this reform, is that the high-level objectives will be set at European level, but the management, the detail will come to the regions, and that's what can make us move forward in this debate.
Thank you. Jamie McGregor.
Thank you very much. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for showing me his report earlier, and I agree with him, and I believe a door has opened to better times with this reform. Two quick questions. Can the Cabinet Secretary give more detail on how the new policy on discards will work in practice at Scottish landing ports? I believe that in English ports, government officials have already been helping make a plan as to how discards and previously unwanted fish can be used. What provisions has the Cabinet Secretary organised in Scottish ports? And secondly, he mentioned the nephrops issue, and on the issue of that relative to the cod recovery plan, can the Cabinet Secretary give a guarantee that he will make it a personal priority to persuade the Commission that there should be an exemption from the effort limits of the cod plan for inshore prawn vessels that can document a minimal bycatch on cod catches? This is something that makes a huge difference to our artisanal prawn fishermen on the West Coast.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. In terms of preparing for the discard ban, clearly our first objective, and that's why it's useful to have some of the flexibilities within the agreement, is to minimise the unwanted catches brought back to shore. Where unwanted catches are brought back to shore, clearly they will no doubt make their way to fish meal, and there will be cost recovery perhaps for the fishermen, but we have to ensure there's not a profit element in there, to ensure there's a disincentive to bringing back unwanted catches. So most of the fisheries management measures will be at sea to avoid catching the fish that's not wanted in the first place. And Scotland has very much blazed a trail, as you'll be aware, across the chamber in terms of closed areas, real-time closures, other forms of spatial management, catch quota schemes, etc. And we want to build on those to minimise unwanted catches. In terms of the cod recovery plan and its interaction with the nephrops fishery, the prawn fishery, clearly one issue we're experiencing at the moment with the biological problem of the prawns simply not appearing, particularly in the Fladden grounds, but it's also a West Coast issue, with landings 50% down, despite the fact the quota's there. We found it difficult to find flexibility to offer those vessels other fishing opportunities because of the cod recovery plan. And if those decisions were taken closer to home, we could build in better flexibilities that balances fisheries conservation with allowing those vessels to fish elsewhere when the prawns don't appear. So hopefully that's one big difference that this can make.
Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the CFP quota adjustment process to accommodate the new discard-free policy. But can the Cabinet Secretary expand on his views about the plans to survey fishing effort to confirm the accuracy of the new discard regime at sea?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, one issue that I was pressing hard within Europe was to ensure that we have the enforcement capability in terms of how we ensure the flexibilities within the agreement are not exploited in terms of the discard de minimis rules. That's why I was pleased, and this was one point I pushed hard at the negotiations, that those countries who wanted to have the biggest possible de minimis of a huge percentage of fish that you're able to discard, and also for all kinds of species, and also some species would be exempted altogether from the discard ban. I'm pleased that those countries were defeated in negotiations and didn't get their way. But of course, some form of compromise was reached, and the percentages I read out in my statement are where we got to. But they will be useful flexibilities in Scotland's circumstances because we have a very complex mixed fishery. But there will be a lot of effort and learning over the next year or two before the bans come into place about how we monitor the discard rates, enforce them, and of course, the de minimis rules are not a blanket provision. It's got to be evidence coming forward from those states that want to implement that flexibility that is for good scientific reasons.
Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I understand from the ministerial statement that before the end of this year, we expect agreement on a new European Maritime and Fisheries Fund. Can the Cabinet Secretary give the Chamber any details of what discussions have taken place specifically about this fund, especially to take account of the needs of fragile coastal fishing communities in achieving social and economic sustainability, including diversification where appropriate?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can tell Claudia Beamish these are issues that have been discussed as part of the negotiations. Clearly, one major priority from Scotland's point of view is to ensure that the funding is aligned to the need to go through the transition from where we are today with discards to a discard ban, and to help the fleet adapt to those new circumstances. And the funding that comes through that fund should be aligned for adopting new measures, new nets, new gears, etc. But it's also important we support our onshore sector to adapt also in terms of where quotas may go in the future, different species, etc. And therefore, that's also an issue taken into account. It's not just, it's not just offshore, it's onshore as well as offshore.
Angus MacDonald.
Thank you. Clearly, the very welcome decentralisation of the hugely damaging one-size-fits-all CFP is crucial to protecting the future of the Scottish fishing fleet. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise if the proposed decentralisation will allow, for example, scientific research on spur-dog fish which can be caught unintentionally by vessels trawling for nephrops on the west coast? These catches are currently discarded. However, the industry is concerned at the loss of income from this bycatch. Will decentralisation allow for a sustainable bycatch fishery to reopen for spur dog in the future, particularly in the period October to December?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the member may be aware that the ongoing scientific advice for spur dog is that this is a species that has to be protected and is under threat in terms of the state of the stock at the moment. Therefore, we are working with the industry to try and develop measures to avoid that particular bycatch. In terms of decentralisation, yes, in the future, hopefully the detail of some of these measures would be decided at a more regional level. But if the scientific advice continues to be that it's a stock which is below safe levels, then we still have to take that into account, of course.
Tavish Scott.
Presiding Officer. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for a copy of his statement earlier on? Would he accept there is the width of the North Sea between the rhetoric on discards and the practical implementation of a policy that could be extremely difficult in a mixed fishery? Would he also accept that in implementing that, he needs to ensure he gets the balance right between achieving the policy on discards and ensuring that boats have a sustainable future? And will he give us will he give Parliament an assurance that the policy will include the full flexibility to us to achieve that? And finally, Presiding Officer, will he make sure that in implementing the regionalisation elements of the new Common Fisheries Policy, no Scottish boat will have a stricter or more onerous regime applied to it than will be against other EU vessels in our coastal waters?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, firstly, on the latter points, I have continually made the point that under regionalisation, Member States must have the power to ensure a level playing field in their own waters. And that is something I will continue to pursue. And as the regional discussions and negotiations are taken forward, that's certainly something I will continue to press. We cannot have vessels fishing side by side under European regulations where there's different rules apply, albeit Member States clearly have more different stocks at different priorities and have to take that into account at the same time. In terms of where the overall debate went during negotiations over implementing the discard ban, given the complexities of operating in Scottish waters, where you have perhaps 30 commercial stocks fishing together, which makes a discard ban quite problematic in some circumstances, that's why the flexibilities that were secured were so important. And as the Chamber will be aware, during the negotiation, there were some countries who didn't want any flexibilities, who perhaps had a minimal interest in fisheries, and then you had other countries who wanted the maximum flexibilities, which would have amounted to no discard ban. I do believe we've got a reasonable compromise, which has been warmly welcomed by the industry here in Scotland. It's something we can work with in the years ahead. And of course, I think the environmental NGOs I was speaking to also recognise there had to be an element of flexibility given the complexities of Scotland's mixed fisheries.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Dave Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the statement from the Cabinet Secretary and particularly the recognition of the problem with the prawns and crabs and so on the West Coast. However, more generally, it's important that people know where their food comes from, especially their seafood, and can make an informed choice when they're buying quality and sustainable Scottish produce. Therefore, can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what agreement has been reached on improving labelling of fishery and aquaculture products, and what is the timetable for implementation of these measures in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the timetable for the new CFP is, of course, the 1st of January next year, albeit it will take some time for some of the measures to be implemented thereafter. In terms of labelling, which is part of the Common Market Organisation regulation, that was a feature, and fish products do have to have the area of sea in which they're caught and the method of gear used on the labelling. For instance, caught by trawl in West of Scotland waters. And there was a proposal to make it mandatory in terms of the labelling to have the date and time of capture also in the labelling. We felt that should be more of a voluntary approach because of the bureaucracy involved in that. The origin of fish products is something I am pursuing at the moment because I think it is an issue. If you go into your average supermarket, it's very difficult to tell where the fish is from. I think that's got to be changed and it's got to be fixed because it's unacceptable in this day and age that people can't tell where the fish is from and which country it was processed in when they're buying fish products from supermarket shelves.
Thank you. Jane Baxter.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his statement today. Reference has been made already to implications for the onshore processing industry, and I wonder if you could give us a wee bit more information about how you'll engage with that industry as we move forward with the changes.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we've been working with the onshore sector through the Sea Fisheries Partnership, which is like the advisory group we set up. Industry and NGOs are members of that group. And part of the work with the onshore sector is to ensure we have the marketing right. And we've just received some proposals from that group about how we can better market Scottish seafood and use the Scottish branding, hopefully, to more effect. And the onshore sector are centre stage of those discussions. And in terms of moving forward with the discard bans and other fisheries management measures, in terms of continuity of supply for our processors, we've had a lot of dialogue with the onshore sector and we'll make sure that continues to be the case.
Thank you. Stuart Stevenson.
In view of the introduction of banking and borrowing of quota across adjacent years, How will this be administered in Scotland, and in particular, Cabinet Secretary, will it be possible after the end of a particular year to either borrow or bank back across to the year that is now just passed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the short answer is yes, that's one of the flexibilities. It's worth pointing out we've always had the ability to bank and borrow quota so that the take-up of quota from year to year can be balanced in an efficient way. What's new, of course, is that quota can now be swapped for quota to help with the discard ban. In other words, if fishermen don't have quota for what they catch, they can surrender other quota and convert that into the quota they need to have to land that legally and not have it going to fishmeal to sell it. Provided overall, of course, the quota limits are met by the country and it's within sustainable limits. So there are some new flexibilities in there that will be very, very important in terms of implementing the discard ban in Scotland.
Thank you. Alison Johnston.
Thank you. I'm glad to see the threat of tradable rights has been seen off, and I'd like to ask the Government about their intentions for allocating fishing opportunities here. Article 16 in new regulations allows for those who fish in more sustainable ways and contribute to coastal communities to get priority access. Will the Cabinet Secretary take advantage of this new clause? Will rights be allocated to those who can fish most sustainably and best support the local economy instead of to those who have just fished the most in the past?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think clearly there's a genuine debate to be had there, and we recently commissioned some research into quota management issues in Scotland to understand who is holding the quota and how it's being used. There is no more God-given right to Scotland than the fishing rights for our own waters, and that's the birthright of our fishing communities, and we do not want that to leave Scotland or go into the hands of the wrong people who are not active fishermen. Unfortunately, the previous administration, pre-1999, introduced the current system, which is far from perfect. And it's, if we were starting with a blank sheet of paper, we'd design a different quota management system. But the issues that the member raises are legitimate issues to be part of that debate moving forward.
Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary consider that the Scottish fleet may have been in an entirely different position today if Scotland's fishing interests had not been regarded as expendable by Westminster Government? And I quote here, of course, from a Scotland Office memo from 1971 released under the 30-year rule, which stated, in the wider UK context, the Scottish fishing industry must be regarded as expendable.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I completely agree that if Scotland had never been taken into the Common-Fisheries-Policy by the Tory UK government back in the early 70s, right now as we speak, we'd have many more thriving fishing communities in this country. And clearly, whilst this reform package is welcome because it certainly improves matters, hopefully greatly in some cases, we will still have the CFP to contend with. It will still be complex, it will still be difficult, and much of that could have been avoided if the Tory party had not taken Scotland into CFP and sold out our fishing communities.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the statement and questions, and we will now move on to the next item of business. I will give a few seconds for members to change seats. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 6921 in the name of Shona Robison on supporting a sporting nation, celebrating and building on Scotland's success in youth sport. Can I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now, please? And I call on Shona Robison to speak to and move the motion. 13 minutes or thereabouts, Minister.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to address the Chamber this afternoon on the subject of youth sport. I'm sure members will agree with me that this is a very important subject, but let me spend some time outlining why I think it is indeed important. For those taking part, the benefits are clear. We know that meeting the physical activity guidelines can deliver dramatic improvements in managing and preventing disease. In Scotland, inactivity contributes to nearly 2,500 deaths each year and comes, of course, at significant financial cost to the NHS. However, the benefits of being active are not limited to the physical. Participation can help young people develop self-discipline, self-confidence, their ability to develop relationships with peers and adults, and of course their success at school. Getting things right in relation to youth sport can create the basis for a lifelong habit of being active. We know that 73% of children already meet the physical activity guidelines, but getting more young people active is, I'm sure, something every member in this chamber would support. On top of these developmental and health benefits, youth sport can contribute to Scotland's sporting success. We're all aware of the fantastic success that Scottish athletes had in last summer's Olympic and Paralympic Games, winning 13 medals, more than in any previous games. But this must not be the high tide mark. If we take the right actions now, elite success in future can be greater still, something I'm confident we'll see some more of next year in Glasgow. But all of this explains why I'm determined that we raise our ambition on youth sport. I'm determined also that our actions on youth sport are informed by the widest possible set of experience and knowledge. The Young Person's Sport Panel has already provided a valuable contribution in this area, and it will continue to be involved together with other stakeholders. This debate is an opportunity for members to bring forward their ideas and suggestions, and I look forward to hearing them. My intention is then to publish a draft youth sport strategy in September and provide Parliament with a further opportunity to debate, discuss and make suggestions at that time. I think it's important, Deputy Presiding Officer, that we begin to look beyond the current targets and look to beyond the horizon of what we're currently aiming to do to what we might want to do in the future around youth sport. And I look forward to continuing that dialogue with members across this chamber. But let me outline what I see as some of the key elements in ensuring success in youth sport. It starts preschool because we need to provide a strong foundation. We know that play is central to how children learn, both for cognitive and softer skills. And we know that outdoor play in particular can be a major contributor to improving outcomes around physical activity and healthy weight. Scotland's first national play strategy will be published later this month and will set out our vision for play and the action that we're going to take to achieve this. There are, of course, already actions in place. The Go to Play Fund provides £3 million to promote the benefits of free play opportunities and quality play spaces for children. Amongst other things, it has supported the deployment of play rangers, allowing children to play in spaces familiar to them, such as their street or local park, while giving parents peace of mind and encouraging positive interaction between children and the local community. School age, of course, provides the opportunity to build on these early foundations. Once children learn to throw, catch, run and jump, a world of different sport and physical activity opportunities are available. School often provides young people with their first taste of structured sport and access to local sports clubs. It also provides an opportunity to try a range of different activities and sports. This, of course, includes swimming, and I hope to announce shortly what additional support will be made available through the very successful Swimming Top-Up programme. Presiding Officer, I am convinced that quality PE provision is the bedrock for ensuring that every child has access to structured physical education. And that's why we committed around £6 million last year to put in place support mechanisms for schools throughout Scotland to meet the commitment to deliver at least 2 hours of PE in primary schools and at least 2 periods of PE in secondary schools for pupils S1 to S4 by 2014. A commitment that, interestingly, the UK Government dropped in October 2010, which does make the Tory amendment a little rich, I have to say, which is why we won't be supporting it. I'm sure you're not surprised to hear. As we know, this government's commitment is delivering results. We saw that from the Healthy Living Survey results from last year, which showed us that 84% of primary schools and 92% of secondary schools were meeting the commitment, up from 3% and 46% respectively in 2004-05. There are also now more PE teachers than at any time since 2006, so we're hoping to see continuing success when the next results are published on the 25th of June and, of course, complete the journey by 2014. Of course, as well as staff, the provision of high-quality facilities plays an important role in providing PE in schools. The Scottish Government is supporting substantial investment in sporting facilities in new schools across Scotland through a £1.25 billion National School Building Programme, Scotland's Schools for the Future. And on that basis, I'm happy to accept the Lib Dem amendment on that basis. To date, local authorities supported by government funded have invested around £24 million in sporting facilities in the 18 schools which have been completed or are under construction. And it's very important, as the Lib Dem amendment touches on, that those schools are widely and easily accessible to the public. Our flagship Schools Programme, Act with Schools, builds on this core provision, providing opportunities for children and young people to participate in sport before, during and after school. Unlike other areas of the UK, we chose not to reduce our investment into school sport, and since 2007, Sport Scotland has invested over £80 million in this programme. Last year alone, the programme provided around 5 million opportunities for young people to take part in over 70 different sports and activities. We know that there is a particular issue around the participation of girls in sport. The Active Girls programme provides £500,000 funding per annum to increase girls and young women's participation in PE, physical activity and sport, delivering 4 key outcomes, and is doing very positive work, a lot of it around dance, which has attracted many girls back into being active within their school environment. It is important, however, to celebrate the successful models already in place within both primary and secondary schools. And with that in mind, I previously announced the introduction of the School Sport Awards. These awards, quite rightly, will recognise schools' achievements in increased PE delivery, the accessibility of school facilities to a local community, and a greater offering of extracurricular sports activities. Yes, of course.
Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just like the Minister, if she could clarify a remark, she said there'd be no cuts to school sports facilities. Does that include or not include teaching, PE teaching staff?
Minister.
Well, I just told you, if you've been listening, that actually the number of PE teachers has actually increased over the last few years. So if you pay attention, you might hear these things. So today, Presiding Officer, I'd like to announce that the awards will be introduced, firstly in North Lanarkshire, West Lothian and Argyll and Bute from the start of August 2013, in fact the next school term, with a view to the awards being rolled out nationally in August of next year. And I hope that's something that the Chamber will welcome, because I think it is really important to recognise the good work that schools are doing when they are doing all the things we're asking them to do, but to do that in a very visible way. And I look forward to seeing those schools come forward. We are continuing to improve Scotland's sporting facilities and have invested over £73 million to deliver some world-class venues. Members will be aware that today the First Minister announced a new cashback for pitches fund of £3.15 million to help install a Scotland-wide network of full-sized 3G pitches for youth football and rugby. And I think this is an example of where the Proceeds of Crime Act is helping to support young people in areas that experience problems with antisocial behaviour and crime. With over 2,500 schools in Scotland, there is a real opportunity to ensure that they provide access to their local community all year round. Clearly, many schools excel at this, and members will be aware of our commitment to ensure that at least half of the 150 community sports hubs will be located in schools. The latest of the 114 hubs being developed is in Callander, the McLaren Community Sports Hub. This brings together McLaren High School, McLaren Leisure, Active Stirling and Stirling Council, along with over 15 local sports clubs, and will help to improve the sporting offer in Callander. Presiding Officer, I think we can go further, and I want to explore with partners the possibility of reaching a position where all secondary schools have the opportunity to either be a community sports hub or have access to one. And we'll be discussing that as we take forward the youth sports strategy. It always amazes me to hear the statistic that over 195,000 people volunteer in Scotland within the 13,000 sports clubs, thereby helping support the 900,000 registered members. I think those are amazing statistics, but we want to build on this. And the Commonwealth Games provides a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make lasting improvements in Scottish sport and bring wide-ranging benefits to individuals, businesses and communities across the nation. We're all aware of the fantastic part played by the Olympic Games makers in the London Olympics, and we must harness the enthusiasm of volunteers here to deliver an inspirational Commonwealth Games to secure a long-lasting legacy from it. I discussed volunteering at length at last week's Health and Sport Committee, and I don't have time to go into all the details here, but there's a lot of very exciting activity going on within our communities. However, we have a real opportunity to use the excitement of the Olympic and Commonwealth Games to do even more, and that's why Sport Scotland are providing a package of further support, which includes regional development managers to work directly with clubs and governing bodies to help local clubs grow and thrive. This work will continue beyond 2014 and will therefore be yet another example of how we're delivering a lasting legacy. We already have a number of legacy programmes underway which are using the Games to inspire a generation of young people. Let me mention just a few. The Youth Legacy Ambassadors programme is engaging young people across Scotland in creating a positive and meaningful legacy for local communities. There are currently 83 Youth Legacy Ambassadors across 25 local authorities fueling community pride and passion in the Games. Game On Scotland, the national education programme for the Commonwealth Games, is helping our children and young people develop as responsible global citizens and will transport them to the heart of the Games, providing a wide variety of rich learning experiences and opportunities. And we have Lead 2014, which harnesses the enthusiasm of our young people to help create the next generation of young sport leaders. 80 student deliverers were trained in each of the years 2011 and 12, training around 800 pupils in schools in each of those years. We're also working with NUS Scotland and the further and higher education sector to focus on making a positive impact on the future of young people through the wealth of volunteering and training opportunities available in the run-up to the Games. And wouldn't it be fantastic to continue that track record of hosting events with the Youth Olympics in 2018? We want to propel the Youth Olympic Games and the Olympic values across the globe while providing the safe and warm welcome for which Scotland is renowned. Thanks to our proven ability to deliver and plan for world-class sporting events, a Glasgow Games can focus on global youth outreach, and we can project the Youth Olympic Games across the world while inspiring the young people of Scotland to become champions in their lives. It's tough competition, but the Scottish people have backed the bid in their thousands, and that support is vital to persuading IOC members of the merits of our bid, as is, of course, the cross-party support that was very welcome in this place. Very grateful for that continued support as we get ever closer to Decision Day on the 4th of July in Lausanne, and I fervently hope for a successful outcome, and I'm sure you'll all be hoping that along with me. Just to conclude, Presiding Officer, I've already outlined my intention to publish the draft youth sports strategy in September, and for that to be informed by the widest possible set of knowledge and experience. I hope to hear some new ideas today from members for that, but I would be very happy to involve members over the summer in that process, and of course we'll be very happy to bring the draft youth sports strategy back for members' comments. So, having said that, Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name. Thank you.
Thanks. I now call on Patricia Ferguson to speak to and move Amendment 6921.2. 9 minutes, please, Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. With just 407 days to go until the start of the 20th Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, it is fitting that we take stock and consider whether the legacy that is so much part of our ambition for these Games will be achieved, particularly for our young people. As someone who was closely involved at the very beginning of the planning for Glasgow 2014, I can tell the Chamber that before the decision was even made to bid for the Games, we knew that to make that investment of time and money worthwhile, there had to be a lasting and measurable legacy from the Games. There were those that said then that a legacy of anything more than a few additional venues could not be achieved. I believe they were wrong then, and I maintain that position to this day. But it was recognised that we would only achieve a legacy of improved health and physical fitness if the planning began the minute the decision was made to bid. In other words, the legacy would be delivered even if the bid was unsuccessful. And I'm very pleased that the current Scottish Government has indicated that that is also their approach, and I give them credit for that. Now, I was, when I read the motion for discussion today, Presiding Officer, a little bit disappointed by the content of the motion, if the Minister will forgive me, because it seemed to suggest that the Commonwealth Games will motivate young people to get involved in sport. Now, I'm sure they'll motivate young people to get involved in sport, but every year during Wimbledon, the streets and parks are full of young people carrying tennis rackets that are quickly consigned to a cupboard after the men's final. What the government motion didn't do was to explain how it planned to harness that motivation and make sport and activity the norm rather than exception. Now, I have to say the Minister has gone a considerable way to reassure me in her contribution this afternoon, and that is very welcome. And I think the opportunity to perhaps contribute to the final youth sports strategy to be published in September will be helpful, and I'm sure it is an opportunity that members with an interest in these areas will take up. And it is vitally important that we get this right, because this is an opportunity to influence a generation of young people, and beyond that too, to live a healthy and fulfilled life through sport, and it must not be squandered. That investment in money, in time and in reputation will be repaid not just by Scottish success on the track or in the arena, but by a step change in the level of physical activity that takes place in this country from now on. We know the difference an active life makes to our health, but we must not discount the effect it has on the quality of life or on the opportunities it can open up to individuals and communities. So how do we do that? Well, I have to say here, I probably agree entirely with the Minister just about. In my view, we should begin in nursery schools. It is important, as the Minister said, that children learn to be physically literate, to run, to jump, to throw and to catch. And I would add to swim at the earliest opportunity to that short list. Because as with any skill learned early, it becomes second nature, and it's more likely then to be carried into future life. So I am very pleased to hear the Minister say that we're to have a play strategy too, because often play is discounted as something that's just about fun without the inherent benefits that come from it too being considered. So that's really good progress in that area. Now, speaking of education, I have to say that progress in achieving the PE targets is welcome, of course, but it is supposed to be a minimum requirement and must be supplemented by other activity if it is to have the desired effect. And we should also ensure that this minimum standard applies to school pupils with a disability. Now, it may be that some activities have to be adjusted to take account of young people's requirements, but disabled young people need to be physically active too. And research carried out by Scottish Disability Sport suggests that disabled youngsters do not attain the recommended levels. That just isn't good enough, and I hope that the Minister's Youth Sports Strategy will address the issue of disability sport when it is published. I recently had the opportunity to visit Scotstoun Leisure Centre to see some of the young people who take part in sports specifically designed for young people with a disability. And I've mentioned this in the Chamber before, but in an entirely different context, so I'll mention it again. We all know that participating in sport can be expensive, but the cost of a walking cycle for a disabled 10-year-old is over £1,000, compared with a cost of, under £200 for a regular bike for a 10-year-old. So it becomes clear just how expensive it is to encourage the involvement of disabled young people on top of the other barriers that we know they experience in their daily lives. The Minister is also quite right to identify girls as an area where there is still more work to be done. And we know that the level at which girls participate in sport and activity drops off around about the age of 12. So it's very welcome if there is additional effort going in to encourage girls to be active, perhaps not to be involved in sport, but at least to be active. And if we ever doubted the importance of sport in relation to health, a quick look at the very helpful briefing from the Scottish Sports Association would put us back on track. It includes some very interesting statistics from the Chief Medical Officers of the UK, who tell us that there is, of course, a strong correlation between regular physical activity and a reduction in the risk of many health conditions, including a 20 to 35% lower risk of cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease and stroke, a 30 to 40% lower risk of metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes, and a 20% lower risk of breast cancer. Now, these are diseases with which Scotland is all too familiar. And if the generation that can follow us can reduce the incidence of just these three conditions because they remain active, then it doesn't take much thinking to realise the benefit to their lives and the money which could be saved long-term from the health budget. So to my mind, investment in sport and physical activity is investment in preventative medicine, in effect. Now, the basic skills which I've mentioned, which should be learned by all in childhood, must of course then be encouraged to continue all through a child's education and beyond. And as a keen walker, I would be the first to say that you don't always need world-class facilities to help you stay active. But there are many sports where facilities are necessary, particularly as you progress through the ranks. And there is no doubt that a well-trained, experienced and committed coach will make a real difference to a sporting career too. So we must invest in facilities in schools and in communities, which is where I would heartily agree with colleagues in the Liberal Democrat benches and their amendment. Indeed, I would go further and say that Sport Scotland should be involved in planning new schools, because over the years they have built up a wealth of experience about the way in which facilities can be organised and run, and that expertise could be usefully harnessed. I've lost count of the number of people who've told me that they took up coaching, not because of their own particular interest in sport, but because their son or daughter wanted to take part in a certain sport and it didn't seem to be on offer in their area. Now, these coaches who dedicate themselves to supporting young people in their communities must in turn be supported in their efforts. And it can be an expensive business to become qualified and to put in the time. So the ideas coming forward about the possibility of employers considering giving paid time off to volunteers is one that I think bears further consideration. School sports awards, as the Minister mentioned, are an important contribution, and I think that idea will be one that proves very popular in our communities. But I sincerely hope too that the youth sports strategy will provide pathways for our young people and join up the efforts of all the organisations that can help them along that path. Some years ago, the idea of an entitlement to culture for every young person was developed, but unfortunately it didn't make it through the change in government. I think there is merit in suggesting that there should be an entitlement to sport and activity for our young people, something tangible that they know they are entitled to, that is the legacy they can take from the Commonwealth Games. We already, through club golf, offer all primary school children the opportunity to experience golf, so perhaps a similar system could be put in place for sport more generally. An entitlement that allows them to have a broad but meaningful experience of sport and allows them to follow their own pathway to wherever that happens to take them. Now, I welcome the announcement the Minister has made today about pitches and cash back for communities. But I would just say that I've argued in this chamber, presiding officer, before that money raised from cashback for communities should be distributed in such a way that those communities most affected by crime should receive the greatest proportion of the money recouped from criminals. Those areas are also where young people are least likely to have the opportunity to participate in sport. And it seems to me that we could better target the proceeds of crime to those communities to ensure that all children have good experiences as they grow up. The 2011 Youth Games,
to a close, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, had a legacy plan, and that was very good to see. That will, of course, carry through to 2014, and I'm delighted to hear about the good work being done by the legacy ambassadors and by others. But it is important that we remember that that links to Glasgow 2018 too, And it is less than a month now, as the Minister said, until we know the announcement. I think this is a really exciting time to have an interest in sport or to be involved in sport for young people in Scotland. And I hope that by our enthusiasm, we can help to motivate them to make it a lifelong commitment too.
Many thanks. Now call on Alex Johnson to speak to and move Amendment 6921.3. Mr Johnson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. This week I had the pleasure of attending the International Karate Festival in Aberdeen, which was run by the National Karate Federation. The event attracted some 200 athletes from home and abroad, and nearly 600 spectators were packed into a limited viewing area. I thoroughly enjoyed the display of high-quality karate and would commend Mr Ronnie Wood, OBE, who also holds the Order of the Rising Sun for his work with martial arts, for devoting so much of his time and energy into making the event such a resounding success. The event benefited charity too, with a collection at the door for the Cardiac Rehabilitation Association. Now let's compare and contrast this success, which was achieved with no financial assistance from outside sources, with the Scottish Government's performance on sport. In its 2007 manifesto, the SNP pledged that it would help Scottish children develop the habit of physical fitness. They will ensure that every pupil has 2 hours of quality PE each week delivered by specialist PE teachers. Yet in 2010 it emerged that only 35% of primary schools and 17% of secondary schools were providing 2 hours of PE a week. This led to another policy sidestep from the Scottish Government, who decided to change the focus for secondary schools at least from 2 hours to 2 periods a week, and set a target for 2014 in the Commonwealth Games for achieving it. It may be that this target will ultimately be achieved, but it's outrageous that even this modest ambition has taken a full 7 years to be delivered. I'm sure she'll get the opportunity to reply at the end. The fact is that the Government just cannot get kids into sport for a paltry 2 hours a week, where they have, using the historic Concordat with COSLA, the greatest potential influence. This motion, therefore, becomes an exercise, if you'll pardon the pun, in anodyne self-congratulation. In reality, there is grave concern that too much of the sports industry remains unregulated, and that Sports Scotland are too concerned with introducing English-style coaching excellence regimes into elite sport, while at the same time doing too little to address the pseudo-commercial businesses who are left to indulge themselves in whatever sporting practices they see fit. Sports coaches are so concerned about some practices by some clubs that I was prompted to ask 3 written questions of the Minister last year about coaching standards and unregulated facilities. The answers disappointed me as much as it did the coaches concerned, and failed, in my view, to address the very real concerns about the low level of qualification and expertise required to start up a sports club. One example that has been shown to me is a franchise opportunity where a franchisee does a 5-day course, which then qualifies them to open their own sports club. I'm sure that the majority of people would agree that 5 days appears to be an extremely short period of time to turn someone who may have little sporting experience into a fully qualified instructor, especially given the possibility of injuries to young athletes that can result from poor quality coaching. I want to see greater participation in sport, which not only brings health benefits, but also teaches discipline, team working, and can come with great socialising opportunities, among other things. Sports clubs in rural areas, especially, are extremely important for these very reasons. I'm deeply concerned that while NHS Scotland encourages parents to get their children active and into sport for the long-term benefit of our population, the Education Minister tinkers with the curriculum for excellence, and the Sports Minister promises glossy strategies and programmes for the people, while actually only delivering for a sporting elite in the hope that they might inspire the others involved. I believe that the Scottish Government's record to date would hardly put them in the winner's podium, and considerably more can and must be done to encourage greater participation in sport. But it's also vital that the Scottish Government takes on board the concerns that exist among highly qualified coaches about the lack of regulation among those operating outside the system. The bottom line is that when an individual or family decide to take up a sport, they must be able to have confidence that what is on offer is of suitable calibre and taught appropriately. Like everyone else in Scotland, I'm very much looking forward to the Commonwealth Games, and I'm certain that there will be a great success. There is no doubt that the investment in facilities will benefit young Scots for a long time to come. But the greatest service to the people of Scotland would be a regulated and supported sporting pathway starting in schools and being progressed via a properly regulated sports industry fit for a modern Scotland. If the Scottish Government is capable of delivering that, then it will have delivered a legacy that will benefit young Scots for years to come. I therefore move the amendment that stands in my name.
Many thanks. I now call on Tavish Scott to speak to and move Amendment 6921.1. Mr Scott, 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Very happy to move the amendment in my name and speak in this useful debate on youth sport. And I suppose the starting point for me was actually pre-reading my papers for tomorrow morning's Audit Committee to find in which the committee will consider the progress report planning for the delivery of the Games, the Commonwealth Games, in 2014, in one of these standard reports we get, which does specifically mention legacy. And I'm sure the Minister is familiar with the contents of this particular paragraph from the Auditor General, in which she says, and I quote, "There is no specific funding for legacy, but the strategic partners have aligned their existing initiatives." She goes on to say, "In the current economic climate, other public and private organisations may find it difficult to invest to achieve a long-term legacy." And that, for me, suggests just the challenge that there must be in this particular area, because for there to be a real significant long-term progress in this, there will need to be a long-term commitment by all the agencies, all the governments, and indeed by local government as well, towards the challenges of this area. And that's why I particularly wanted to pick up the point this afternoon about schools, because that seems to me fundamentally where this debate about the long term should be. Now, the government is, as the Minister mentioned, investing considerably in a new school building programme, no more in many ways than previous governments did, but that's as it should be. Although one or two councillors, I may say, of no political persuasion have observed to me that it's in effect PFI by the back door, but that's for another day and another debate. What I think is important about this is the point that Patricia Ferguson made about the role of Sport Scotland. Surely we should be using our leading agency with all the expertise they've put together since 2000, when they produced a paper on the school estate being widened out for community sport in a guide called Our Guide to Community Use of School Sports Facilities. Surely they should be integral to that process. And yet, in my quick bit of research into the way in which the Scottish Futures Trust is building those schools and the way in which the hubcos around Scotland are acting, that does not appear to be the case. And as Patricia Ferguson mentioned, Sport Scotland are not therefore directly involved, and I think that is a mistake. And I hope in the youth strategy that the Minister is going to publish in the autumn, if she takes one idea from me, it would be that that would change, because this is an organisation, after all, that are currently carrying out a research study on sports facilities across the school estate in Scotland. It's being done by the Sport Industry Research Centre at Sheffield Hallam University, and it's due to produce its findings this summer. And I would have thought that would be an integral part of assessing where we are and what needs to happen. But it is one thing to announce, very welcome announcement, as the Minister made, or if the First Minister made it, about cash back for pitches. It's one thing to announce that, but then to look closely at what the Scottish Futures Trust is doing on school buildings and to find out that they don't involve, as I believe they should, Sport Scotland directly in an assessment of what the correct facilities should be for the development of sport in schools. And that not only that, but this Parliament, of course, did consider that through the Health Committee in its Pathways into Sport inquiry back in in 2009, and did recommend, the committee that is, that Sport Scotland should be a statutory consultee on any proposed development of any school at this time. Now, that rather might be academic. I think if you're a statutory consultee, you're at the end of the process, not at the beginning. So I'd rather the Minister, instead of maybe following that particular recommendation, just made sure that in future and from now on, because I can't believe it's not happening now, although I have heard it from the horse's mouth that it's not happening, that Sport Scotland should be involved in that, and that a closer relationship with the Scottish Futures Trust should immediately be in place so as to ensure that our premier body responsible for this area, responsible after all for the Active Schools Policy. It was the Active Schools Policy that was started under the last government, rightly carried on by this government. It's being implemented by Sport Scotland. I understand their board will consider it again in the coming, consider an extension of that again in the coming months. That if you believe in active schools, you believe in that programme, then you should also logically take forward an active consideration of how that body works with local government to achieve the right facilities in our schools. Now, the Minister mentioned as well Community Sports Hub, and I forget her figures now, she'll correct me if I got this wrong, but my figures are that 75% of these hubs are expected to be in the school estate. If the Minister is aiming for all, I can completely agree with that. I think that is eminently sensible and the way it should go. But we are some way away, in my view, from some education authorities, not all, but some education authorities, to say nothing of some head teachers, accepting that their school is a complete community asset. Many still consider their schools, and I can say this from personal experience, to be a school first and community asset second, and happy to give way on that point.
Fiona Roberts.
Is that 50% of the community sports hubs, that's 150, will be within secondary schools. But what we're looking at is what next, and the discussions that are going on around the youth sports strategy would be that every secondary school will either be a hub or have access to one.
Happy to accept that point and agree with that approach. Can I also emphasise the briefing that the Scottish Sports Association gave to members for this debate, in which they highlight in particular the importance of places in the same area that I have briefly talked to in relation to school fields, swimming pools, halls and gyms. They are, as the briefing, as the association rightly say, Scotland's great untapped sports resource. If we can open up existing and new schools, every community can be active. And that seems to me to be at the essence of what we should be achieving in this area, and in the essence of making sure that we do have a lasting legacy for the future. Thank you.
Many thanks. And we now move to open debate, and I call on Aileen MacLeod to be followed by Margaret McDougall. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm delighted to be speaking in support of the Minister's motion this afternoon. I believe the Government has ambitious plans to create a lifelong habit of sporting activity with all the social and health benefits that accompany a more physically active lifestyle. Now, the notable success of Scottish athletes in the 2012 Olympics and Paralympics has helped to raise the profile of sport across Scotland already, but we also have a fantastic opportunity for the whole country in next year's Commonwealth Games. And it's an opportunity not only to encourage talented young sportsmen and women, but also to encourage all of our young people to be more physically active and to see participation in sport as something for them all. So I warmly welcome the Government's commitment to deliver a youth sports strategy. Now, we know that physical activity is important, and we also know that around 48% of Scottish adults actively undertake the recommended minimum weekly levels of physical activity. And 73% of our children are actually meeting the minimum levels, including an increase in the percentage of girls doing 60 minutes of moderate activity every day, which is encouraging. And this is important since, as the Minister said earlier, physical inactivity contributes to 2,500 deaths a year, and that comes at a significant financial cost to our NHS. And indeed, it would be fair to say that increasing levels of physical activity is one of the most effective measures anyone can take to help protect their long-term health prospects, and is key to our preventative health agenda. Presiding Officer, I want to reflect on what some of that national policy direction looks like at a local level, since it is at that level that young people can most readily engage in sport. And in Dumfries and Galloway, the local authority has integrated its active schools and community sports programmes so that where there was once a division between what was provided in a school setting and what happened in the wider community, there is now a joined-up approach. Now, active schools officers are responsible for sporting activity, right from preschool fun to working with teenagers and community sports clubs. This arrangement, I'm advised, is the first of its sort in Scotland, and one that I hope that the Minister might look at in preparing the draft strategy. And using that structure, Dumfries and Galloway is already embracing the spirit of the Olympics and the Commonwealth Games through its Active Games, which took place for the first time last year. Now, Active Games, which is badged as a game for Dumfries and Galloway, is linked to both the London 2012 and Glasgow 2014 legacies. And the 2012 Active Games saw 450 children competing in 8 sports across 3 venues and received funding support from Events Scotland, Legacy 2014 and high-profile local sponsors. The Games were designed to involve the whole of a geographically widespread region, with every cluster of primary schools competing in the qualifying events and heats. Now, this year, children will compete in athletics, cycling, badminton, swimming, gymnastics, netball, tag rugby and swimming. And the final will be held on Saturday, the 7th of September in Dumfries, and I very much hope that it will eclipse last year's success. But Dumfries and Galloway is not only off to a good start with its Active Games. Working with Sports Scotland, the local authority is rolling out 3G artificial sports pitches in strategic locations, all of which have an element of community sports club involvement in administration and the operation of the facilities, as well as in their use. Now, the use of school facilities, Presiding Officer, to which the Minister referred, is also taking shape. The new Dalbeattie Learning Campus, for example, is likely to have a climbing wall built into the specifications because there is currently no such facility anywhere in the region, and community use will be specifically designated or designed into the new campus. In addition to all of this, Dumfries and Galloway has also been establishing itself as a destination for international competition in its own right. Now, the Dumfries Ice Bowl, which is an absolutely fantastic facility, will host the World Mixed Doubles Curling Championship and World Senior Men's and Women's Curling Championship next year. Over 30 senior teams from around the world are expected to compete, along with a similar number of mixed doubles teams. The same venue will host the Under-20 World Ice Hockey Championship this year and the Under-18 World Ice Hockey Championship next March, having successfully hosted the Women's Under-18 World Championship qualification tournament in October last year, an event I remember very well, having managed to be there for the opening game. Now, I'm sure that all of those responsible for the hard work which secured this growing reputation as a venue for international events would be pleased to welcome the Minister at one of those events, should her diary allow. This is an important achievement for Dumfries and Galloway, and one which I fully support, but it's also important because, like the Commonwealth Games, it brings elite-level sport closer to home, and I think it's important for our young people. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I believe that encouraging our young people across the board into greater participation in sport is a valuable and worthwhile aim. As I said earlier, it will be good for our health, it is good for our well-being, and it will show clear benefits in long-term health prospects for this population. But it's also fun, and I can't think of anything better than encouraging our children to have fun. There is good work underway already. The examples I've highlighted demonstrate this is the case, and we are approaching 2014 with solid local activity already enthusing our children and young people. And I very much hope that Glasgow's bid to host the Youth Olympics in 2018 is successful on July the 4th. Presiding Officer, I believe that's a positive starting point, and I'm happy to support the motion in Shona Robson's name.
Many thanks. I now call on Margaret McDougall to be followed by Bob Doris. 6 minutes,
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to speak in this debate, given the national significance of next year's Commonwealth Games, and I see this as the perfect time to highlight the great work done in my own region by North Ayrshire Council under the previous Labour administration, which put in place many programmes and initiatives that have had benefits to individuals across the local area. North Ayrshire Council, KA Leisure and North Ayrshire and Arran Health Board have placed an emphasis on jointly providing opportunities for everybody in North Ayrshire to be active, involved and inspired. With over 50 sporting clubs in North Ayrshire, it was worrying that the local authority in 2008 held a worse than average position in relation to 38 of the 61 indicators of the health and well-being profile. So in 2010, KA Leisure launched the Fit for the Future strategy to meet the national outcomes within the National Performance Framework. But more importantly, the strategy aims to tackle health inequalities, especially given that the estimated cost of physical inactivity in Scotland for 2010-11 was £94.1 million. So I suggest this money would be better spent on early intervention, as prevention is better than any medicine. I want to take this opportunity to call on the Government to ensure that they are taking steps to support future generations into success in youth sport. The legacy for the Olympic Games, the legacy of the Commonwealth Games in 2014, and hopefully the legacy which can be provided if Glasgow is successful in winning its bid for the 2018 Youth Games. But it has more than a legacy for Glasgow. This Government must take steps to ensure that the legacy can be enjoyed across Scotland. We must ensure that my constituents who live only 40 minutes away from Glasgow can benefit from the governmental spending which Glasgow will get. What legacy has this Government put in place for other areas to make sure these benefits extend far beyond the location of the Games? In 2012, I noted the Sports Minister announced the funding for a national sports centre with investment of £25 million, and last year was delighted to support my Labour colleagues on the Council with plans to place a bid for a football academy to be established in Largs at the existing Inverclyde Sports Centre, especially given its links with the world-renowned football managers such as Sir Alex Ferguson and Jose Mourinho. Yet it seems the Government's change in the criteria from a football academy to a national performance centre meant that Largs was no longer a contender, even though officials at North Ayrshire Council had begun to prepare a bid. It seems the real reason the Council was dissuaded from placing a bid was that the decision had been taken out of their hands by the continual moving of the goalposts, if you'll excuse the pun, of alterations to the criteria. Happy to give way.
I mean, doesn't the member welcome the fact that more sports are now going to be involved in the National Performance Centre? Certainly the sporting world in Scotland is very welcoming of that fact, rather than it just being about football. Surely that's something the member would welcome.
Margaret McDougall.
Yes, but it would have been useful if that had been clear in the criteria from the outset. The three sites which are now being considered for the Academy, Edinburgh, Dundee and Stirling, are all East Coast or Central, and as much as I welcome this investment for any future sporting heroes we may produce, it is disappointing that this project will now join a long list of sporting investments lost to the west of Scotland. I am honoured to represent an area which has many successful junior teams and clubs, teams that are run by the hard work of thousands of dedicated volunteers. And while I am delighted when I hear of their sporting successes and when they're successful in gaining big lottery funding, I know it is a constant struggle for these clubs to remain solvent despite their hard work and dedication. Very often the continuation of and the opportunities these clubs provide for young people across the region is dependent on the capacity of the members to complete funding applications. So perhaps the Minister can give some thought to giving support to help people to complete funding applications. It's true that many of these well-established organisations like Co-winning Sports Club and the Evolution Skate Park in Stevenston have become social enterprises to try to become self-sufficient. But they are still largely reliant on grants so they can update and enhance their facilities to members. I call on this Government to consider putting more support into aiding the viability of local clubs who provide sporting opportunities and inspiration to our young people every day, particularly in areas where there are clear health inequalities, like North Ayrshire. We need to make sure that grassroots sport funding is both constant and available, because to truly ensure a future legacy, there needs to be real and long-term investment in everyday sporting opportunities. And I look forward to the youth sports strategy in September this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Bob Doris to be followed by Jenny Mara. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I welcome the forthcoming Scottish Government strategy on youth sport? And as it will be a draft strategy, which is something I also welcome, that will give all interested stakeholders the opportunity to work constructively to further develop the youth sports strategy in a collegiate manner, and that's the right way to take things forward. We all want to ensure that the legacy potential from Glasgow's Commonwealth Games is maximised, and it should significantly increase the interest of youngsters to get involved in sport. However, just as significantly, as the motion indeed before us states, we want to create a lifelong habit of being active. In other words, it's not just about getting young people active, it's about keeping them active, and if I have time, we'll say more about that later. Also, undoubtedly, investment in sporting infrastructure and funds for specific initiatives to support schools and sports clubs to get many more young people active are crucial, and I'll note one or two of the investment priorities that have been made, alongside, of course, community sports hubs, which is a significant cash saving actually to many clubs who are working collegiately together. So, for example, the £7.4 million capital spending budget to transform sports facilities locally across Scotland is money that local clubs can access, and the £10 million Legacy 2014 fund for active places has already awarded cash to 24 community projects across Scotland. So there are examples of funding being leveraged in. But what I want to talk about is how we direct future investment. We really need a full audit to determine where there are lower levels of sporting participation amongst young people, and also, just as importantly, how we take that forward, how we tackle that. Is it because of an issue around volunteers, around the range of sports clubs and sporting opportunities that are available? Is it a lack of an access to qualified coaches? Is it a facilities issue? Is it to do with the cost of access? Is it because there's a weak sporting culture in some areas? Just different barriers there are to participating in sport. Well, we have to know that information before we then direct funds to tackling the issues there are to gain the opportunities from the Commonwealth Games. So we need a baseline by which to measure any future success in terms of sporting participation and to crucially inform future investment. And if I could give two other suggestions to what should be part of that baseline to inform future investment in this area, and that is to look at areas of particular deprivation and to see how we can prioritise investment in those areas, and also areas with particularly poor health outcomes. They quite often, unfortunately, are two in the one things, but those should be two clear criteria to direct funding to get young people more physically active. And there have been some really good signs in that. For example, the £2.2 million investment by Glasgow Water Sports to develop a paddle sports centre at the Pinkston Basin in Glasgow, with £1 million coming from the Scottish Government, is a crucial initiative driving regeneration in a deprived area. But just as importantly, actually, there's a network of local youth clubs in that area who are now forming their own canoe club to get physically active, and opportunities that otherwise wouldn't be available to the people of Maryhill, Springburn and beyond. Also in North Glasgow, I'm delighted at the joint work from Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government to make the bid for the Youth Olympics, which will see 400 new social rented houses delivered in that part of the city because of Scottish Government commitments, which will crucially take place irrespective of whether the Youth Olympic bid is successful or not. And I think that's something, whilst we all want the Youth Olympics bid to be successful, it's important investment is leveraged in irrespective of that. Can I say a little bit about costs in relation to accessing sports facilities? A club that I met with recently, North Kelvin United, were telling me that they tried to keep the football club tried to keep costs as low as possible. But even if they're charging £3 or £4 a week for young people, if you have 2 young boys and you're on benefits, by the time you actually give them a can of juice or whatever as well, you're talking £10 a week just to get your kids actively involved in sport, and that's not money a lot of families have. So we have to think quite carefully in relation to that. And I should pay credit to that particular club, because for the first time ever they are launching a girls football team, which is something I think we all want to see in terms of getting young girls more physically active, but also about how we support success within deprived communities where there's examples of sports clubs that are doing well and how we help them. And I think it's incumbent upon me to mention the formidable Alex Richardson, who from the Gladiators weightlifting project, who gave quite dramatic evidence to the Health and Sport Committee. He informs me that in recent championships in Austria, that young kids from the East End of Glasgow got 2 gold medals, 4 silver medals, 4 bronze medals and other high placings. And he points out that should the Youth Olympics bid be successful for 2018, that many of those young people will qualify to take part in that. But those young people should be taking part in the Youth Olympics in 2018, irrespective of where it is held. So my plea would be is how Sport Scotland and the Scottish Government and others work strategically to make sure young people who could be sporting icons in the local communities can excel to the highest level. And perhaps in Gladiators we have one example of how they could do that. Final note, Presiding Officer, for the oldies. I'm suggesting, because you want young people physically active, they do eventually get old, and I'm suggesting that Glasgow can put in a bid for the 2021 World Masters Games for the over 35s. Young people will reach 35 at some point in their life, so I'm hoping the Minister will, will actually back that bid, and I've written to Glasgow City Council as well to see it as part of that legacy, to keep people physically active for all of their lives, if we can work in partnership to deliver for the city and to deliver for Scotland.
Thank you very much. I now call on Jenny Mara to be followed by Joan McAlpine, 6 minutes, and there's a little time for interventions, not much, a little.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Dundee has been campaigning for nearly 2 years to bring the National Football Academy to our city, the ideal chance to encourage youth participation in sport in our city. We expect a decision this summer. The Sports Minister has passed responsibility for this decision out of her brief to the Deputy First Minister, so we look forward to Nicola Sturgeon's decision on this issue. Dundee's bid is excellent, meeting all the Stage 1 criteria and beyond. And now Dundee City Council is working hard to secure the academy for our city at the final stage this summer. Dundee's competition is from the other 2 finalists, Heriot-Watt University and Stirling University. I was keen to find out how much capital investment that each of the 3 finalists had over the years since devolution. However, I was told that the Scottish Government does not hold information on how much capital investment or sports investment has gone into each constituency or postcode. But the Sports Minister will know as well as I that we could pull... Sure.
I think it might have helped if you named the right constituency, because you actually named Dundee City East. Perhaps you should have named Dundee City West, which is where the NPC would be based in Dundee. Maybe you need to be a bit more careful, put your questions in.
I understand that the Scottish Government doesn't hold investment figures for Dundee City East or West or any other constituency in the whole country. The Scottish Government doesn't hold these figures. But the Sports Minister will know as well as I that we could pool together the information and make educated estimates of the amount of support each community has received. Stirling and Heriot-Watt are both universities and have received millions of pounds of central government investment. But the Sports Minister will be acutely aware, as I am, of the general lack of investment in Dundee and the area where we have proposed that the Football Academy will be located at the back of Lough Ea. The strength of the Dundee bid is that it is a community bid. Backed by everyone I speak to in the city, I'm sure the Sports Minister will agree with me that she would struggle to find someone in our city who does not want the Football Academy to be in Dundee. 6,000 people have taken the time to sign up to the campaign, and there is cross-party support from Labour and the SNP. It is a campaign and bid that has come from our community. Sports clubs all over the city have asked for sign-up sheets for players, coaches, grands, granddads, aunties and uncles. Our proposed site is in an area badly in need of economic regeneration. Our bid does not have the advantage of pre-existing university facilities to build around, but this was intentional because we want Scotland's Football Academy and Sporting Performance Centre to be located in a community who would feel its benefits the most. Now, a missed opportunity could be to build around an already sophisticated sports complex at either one of the two competing universities, benefiting an already privileged university community. But a decision with foresight, commitment to really encouraging sport where it is most needed in our communities with high unemployment and high deprivation. Now that would be an exciting and tempting decision for the Deputy First Minister to make. To put Scotland's new sports academy in a community that is crying out for change, desperately in need of investment, and a community that has asked the Scottish Government in our thousands for the Government to put its confidence and trust in Lochee and in Dundee. Because for too long, we have been Scotland's forgotten city. Because although welcome the Scottish Government's current commitment to Dundee, it is not enough. When I raise in this chamber jobs for Dundee, John Swinney tells me that Dundee is getting the V&A. When I raise access to music tuition in Dundee, Fiona Hislop tells me that Dundee is getting the V&A. I hope that today the Sports Minister will agree with me and many people in our city that as wonderful as the V&A project will be for Dundee, it is not enough to address a long-term lack of investment in our city. Not enough to inspire a generation of youth sport participation, but that the Football Academy will be a major step in the right direction to encourage a new generation of sporting heroes in our city and a much-needed economic boost for Lochee and Dundee.
Thank you very much. Now call on John McAlpine to be followed by David Torrance. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to speak today in this debate on celebrating and building on Scotland's success in youth sport. I want to focus my speech today on how youth sport is being supported, particularly in the southwest of Scotland, although I should say to my constituents that anything I say can only scratch the surface of what is going on there. Dumfries and Galloway has benefited particularly from the Cashback for Communities Fund. There's been a £1 million government investment in the 3G pitches across Dumfries and Galloway in Annan, Dumfries and Stranraer. Annan Athletic unveiled their new 3G pitch in December 2012, the first of its kind in Dumfries and Galloway, and the pitch was funded by Sports Scotland and Dumfries and Galloway Council, as well as the Government, while the Scottish Football Association played a key role in advising the Government as to where to allocate funding. And I know that having visited Annan Athletic, it is certainly being well used for community activities and youth development. And Annan Athletic are first class in terms of community engagement, and the new surface will allow a massive increase in capacity to allow all sections of the club to grow. However, easy as it is to get carried away with football after Scotland's win against Croatia recently, it's not football I wish to concentrate on today. I wish to talk about a sport in which Scotland reaches world-class heights on a regular basis, and that is curling. There has been some disagreement over the origins of curling. Dr. James Taylor, in his 1884 book, Curling, the Ancient Scottish Game, says there's good reason to believe that curling originated in Scotland, probably in the southwest district of the country, which has always been its stronghold. Now, I'm aware that the Netherlands and Belgium do have a strong claim to be the home of curling, but what cannot be disputed is Scotland's preeminence in the game and the southwest of Scotland's disproportionate contribution in getting Scotland to that preeminent position. Scottish women are world champions at the moment, and the skipper of that team, Eve Muirhead, is most certainly in the running for our Scottish Sports Personality of the Year. Eve curls with the Dunkeld Curling Club, which is based in Pitlochry. However, what is less well known is that her teammates all hail from the southwest of Scotland. They include Anna Sloan, aged 18, from Lockerbie, who plays third for Eve Muirhead's junior rink, but at the same time skips her own ladies' rink. Then there is second Vicky Adams, who's 23 from Stranraer, and Claire Hamilton, who is also 23 from Dumfries and presently plays lead for the Scottish champion rink. Hamilton was a member of the Anna Sloan rink that won the gold medal for Great Britain in the 2011 Winter Universiade. Hamilton played for the team's alternate, and she also played third for Sloan that year. Now the girls are looking forward to the Winter Olympics in 2014 in Sochi, Russia. And Scotland, England and Wales all compete separately in international curling by an agreement between the curling federations of these three home nations. Only Scotland can score qualification points on behalf of Great Britain because, obviously, we are the best. And Team GB have qualified for the 2014 Olympics and are currently standing third in the world. I was very pleased to receive an email from Anna Sloan of the Women's Champion team this morning, Anna Sloan from Lockerbie, reflecting on the importance of good facilities in building her expertise. Anna trains at home, mainly in Dumfries' DG1 and the David Keswick Centre on Wednesday to Saturday, and during the winter, with the lead up to the Olympics, she'll be based in Stirling. However, both herself and her teammate Claire Hamilton said that their success in curling was due to their families and it was due to the tradition in the southwest. She says it seemed only natural that she curled. All her cousins did it as well, and she began her training in the Lockerbie ice rink, which reopened after receiving this year after receiving a Sport Scotland investment of £214,000 to enhance their facilities. It shows the worth of investing in tradition. There's a tradition of curling in South West Scotland, probably in the same way as there is a tradition of cross-country skiing in Norway or a tradition of long-distance running in the Horn of Africa. Therefore, I would welcome the Minister's assurance that we will also invest in our traditional strengths here in Scotland by considering curling's inclusion in the draft youth sports strategy. Presiding Officer, the motion and amendments rightly draw attention to the Commonwealth Games and its legacy. However, can I also make mention of some of the world-class events in the area of winter sports that will take place in the South West next year, in which my colleague Aileen MacLeod has already touched on. In April and May 2014, the Dumfries Ice Bowl will host the Curling World Championship Mixed Doubles and the Curling World Championship Senior Men and Women's. These events are expected to attract at least 7,000 visitors to Dumfries next year and help build on the venue Dumfries Ice Bowl's vision of striving towards being the leading ice sport venue in Scotland. The Ice Bowl has recently seen considerable upgrading to its curling rink and its stones. It's also home to the Solway Sharks ice hockey team, who have won 10 major titles since 1997 and who are the current ENL North Division Cup winners and Division 2 champions. Aileen MacLeod has already spoken about the 2012 Active Games. I'm delighted that the Ice Bowl next year will add to that, not just with curling, but also with the under-18 and under-20 ice hockey male championships. This year I was delighted to attend an event which encourages local people to volunteer for these Ice Bowls events. Those volunteering roles will include school visits, school liaison and coaching. Presiding Officer, curling is coming home to the southwest of Scotland next year, and I'm sure everyone in this chamber will welcome that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now call on David Torrance to be followed by Alison Johnston. A generous 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am delighted to be speaking today about the Scottish sporting success and the aspirations of the Scottish Government for the nation's sporting future. With the Commonwealth Games and the Ryder Cup due to arrive in Scotland in 2014, the issue of sport and achieving a sporting legacy...
Mr Torrance.
Of legacy is of particular importance. It is widely hoped that these elite sporting events will inspire and subsequently encourage Scotland's youth to participate in a variety of sporting activities, thus raising social capital and benefiting communities and society as a whole. In a bid to highlight the potential for greater sporting participation in Scotland, the Scottish Government has initiated measures which seek to attract youths from all socio-economic backgrounds to sports and physical activities that might otherwise not have been considered. The Scottish Government is currently developing a youth sports strategy designed to encourage young people to partake in physical exercise by making sport accessible and enjoyable. Young People's Sports Panel are to be a key contributor to the Scottish Government's youth sports strategy. The panel was comprised of 16 young people formed through a partnership between Sport Scotland and Young Scot, with two principal objectives: to influence and shape the future of sport in Scotland and to raise the profile of sport in Scotland. The panel hopes to harness current sporting excitement to motivate and encourage young Scots to participate by highlighting existing opportunities to those who may be unaware of the diverse sporting activities available to them. Further, the Scottish Government is a champion of physical education in school and has demonstrated its commitment to youth sport and fitness through two core initiatives. For the preschool children's play strategy is in development, and the Go To Play scheme was initiated by the Scottish Government in 2012. For children of primary and secondary school age, the Scottish Government aims to increase the frequency of physical education lessons to approximately 2 hours of lessons per academic week. The Scottish Government is supporting the implementation of this initiative with £5.8 million in funding over 2012-13 and 2013-14. In a bid to maximise youth's potential, over 900 pupils from across Scotland are to participate in the Youth Volunteering and Leadership Programme, LEAD 2014. This programme, delivered through collaboration between Youth Sport Trust, Sport Scotland and the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games, has been designed to encourage young people to become sporting ambassadors and enhance skills which could be utilised in other areas of their lives. The skills gained from such participation could potentially be invaluable attributes when entering the labour market. Youth volunteering opportunities, such as those offered by LEAD 2014, reinforce the excellent work presently undertaken within the community sport hubs, of which there are 2 in my constituency, and through the Active Schools network. Indeed, volunteers are an integral part of a sporting infrastructure, with 150,000 volunteers currently involved in sport in Scotland. The development of youth volunteers is vital to continue the existence of the infrastructure. The success of Cash Back for Communities scheme, launched in 2007, must be stressed if we are to celebrate Scotland's success in youth sport. The contributions of a scheme to sport and sports facilities is by no means insignificant, with £8 million invested in sport alone thus far and a further £16.7 million committed to projects through 2014. This initiative is unique to Scotland. By using money recovered from proceeds of crime, Act 2002, and investing it in community programmes and facilities, largely for the benefit of young people, it tackles the issues of social exclusion and attempts to re-engage disaffected youths in education and promote health and well-being, primarily in areas which have been affected by crime and antisocial behaviour. However, the scheme funds partnerships with Scottish sporting associations to deliver projects in all local authority areas in Scotland. Programmes offered are designed to be accessible to all, irrespective of race, class, gender, economic circumstances and physical ability. They are also designed to be individually developmental, with emphasis on the changing of behaviour and attitudes, as well as improving personal and physical skills. In the 2012 report into Cashback's Scottish Athletics programme, in which 8,000 young people took part, the most popular response when organisers attempt to discern what difference the programme had made to their lives was stopping getting into trouble. This response highlights the requirement for such schemes as this. Cashback provides young people with activities to keep them socialised and engaged with the community and society as a whole. It's hoped that the long-term outcomes of Cashback for Communities programme will include young people becoming successful learners with improved life chances. Indeed, recent evidence has found that there is a link between sport and participation and improvement in educational attainment. Therefore, as mentioned, sport can be used to engage young people, especially those who are facing further social exclusion as a result of poor educational achievement. The SFA Schools for Football programme, which is supported by Cashback, attempts to re-engage such young people in areas of social deprivation. The programme has observed progress in terms of student attendance, behaviour, academic attainment and motivation. Other sporting programmes supported by Cashback have witnessed similar results. Thus, it is clear that sport can be utilised to prevent any future social exclusion of Scotland's youth. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Glasgow Youth Olympic bid team on the positive impression that made on the International Olympic Committee's Youth Olympic Games Evaluation Commission. Scotland is one of 3 countries shortlisted to host the Youth Olympics in 2018. If the Games were to be secured for 2018, this would create further opportunity to progress the legacy of the 2014 events.
Thank you very much. I now call Alison Johnston to be followed by Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the chance to contribute to the debate this afternoon. It's very important that we do all that we can to develop a passion for sport in our young people. Indeed, it was an Austrian industrial manager, Johann Rosensoff, who in 1998, as a response to growing global concerns about childhood obesity and the dropping participation of youth in sport activities, suggested that we should have a Youth Olympics. We've heard, I'm not going to repeat the many comments colleagues have made about the health reasons and the health benefits that being active bring and the preventative spend. It's just sheer common sense to be investing in sport at this time. It's really important that we encourage a passion in our young people for sport, so we have to do all that we can to make sure they have an opportunity to find the sport that is for them. If someone is passionate about a sport, it's more likely that they'll exercise, they'll want to practice, they'll want to play the games that makes them better at their sport. They'll be moving rather than sitting. And of course, some sports require more running than others, but all require some level of activity. And involvement in sport encourages social interaction. You spend time developing relationships with teammates. You might meet people from different schools, different workplaces, different areas, people you might not come across otherwise. Young people learn to work together. It's fun, yet they have a goal. And it stops our young people from telling us constantly that they're bored. It gets them away from screens. It gives them something really positive to do. And it teaches so many life skills too. Time management, getting your kit ready, goal-oriented thinking. It lets them see that if you work and if you practice, you can achieve something. And these are transferable skills that can be applied to exams and to learning, skills in trades and so on. And it helps young people de-stress. They can forget about school, they can forget about the pressure of these exams. And they become mindful of what they're doing in that moment. If you're learning the high jump, for example, you can't be thinking about, your homework or the other pressures on your life. And I think that is very healthy for our young people. And self-esteem develops too, through encouragement, through the praise for their efforts, whether they're experts or not. They learn that if they strive, they can improve, it empowers them, and it develops a really healthy, positive attitude. As I've said before, I do think it's important that we give children every opportunity to try out a wide variety of sports, whether that's free running, whether it's BMX, mountain biking. It might be something away from the mainstream, and I'd certainly like the youth sports strategy to ask young people themselves what they would like to do, what they would like to see in the strategy, and what the barriers are and incentives are. And Bob Doris spoke about the costs to young families, and certainly, accessing an athletics track, buying some spikes and so on, may just be beyond the incomes for some. Although, I do know my own local club have a second-hand policy where people hand in gear, and that's the kind of thing we should be encouraging. I think there are obviously opportunities in our daily lives to encourage young people to be active. The bikeability scheme, where every young child in Scotland should learn to cycle, is very important, but we are still relying on volunteers to come forward. We're relying on parents. And this is the same with coaching. And indeed, Edinburgh last week hosted its traditional annual interscholastics, but not every school in this city had a team. And I'd like to know why, because I think young people are being deprived of an opportunity there. If we're relying on one teacher who's simply unavailable that day, then we have to make sure there's a fallback for there. So I'd really like, a sort of basic commitment from local authorities. All our schools will compete in the inter-area competition, and if not, why not? I think it's fair to say we are a sports-mad country, and I'd really like to see that movement from spectator to participator. So that's something that I'm sure, we're sandwiched this year between the Olympics last year, the Commonwealth Games next year. We have the World Championship Athletics in August, and I'm sure we'll see some of our excellent young Scottish athletes like Ailey Child, who's won a really gold and an indoor silver medal in the European indoors earlier this year, Lindsay Sharp, European gold medalist. who will have a chance to develop and become household names before we all have the opportunity to see them next year in Glasgow. This will have an impact, and I do believe that positive role models are part of the picture of encouraging more people to take part in sport. I'm very welcoming of the Glasgow bid for the Youth Olympics. It's certainly been well received in the press, and rightly so. I'd like to state my support for Edinburgh's bid to become the National Performance Centre. It has much to commend it, and it's also close to some of the less affluent parts of the city who would very much welcome it. I also support Bob Dorisey's call for Glasgow to host the 2021 World Masters, and I'd like to inform you that if this bid is successful, I will make sure that I am fit to participate. No pressure. I think the amendments have much to commend them. I do think that 2 hours of PE in primary school is the bare minimum we should be looking at. I do think high school pupils need more than 2 periods. This is a period in life where we traditionally lose young people, young women in particular, as we've heard. So I'd really like to see a focus on much more, and I do believe that the Minister realises that this is not sufficient. I very much welcome the Minister's comments on play. If we encourage play, then we encourage physical literacy, more self-confidence, and make it far more likely that our young people will go into sport. Just in finishing, Presiding Officer, the youth sports strategy, I'd like to make sure that governing bodies have funding for coaches. We're still too short of them. I'd like to see a voucher system to enable young people to try different sports. Look at the club golf model, look at the work Triathlon Scotland are doing. I'd like a commitment to make sure that every child in Scotland learns to swim by, and I'm not going to suggest an age, I'm not an expert, but let's find out the optimal age by which you should learn to swim. We wouldn't want our children to leave school without being able to read and write. Let's make that the same for swimming. And I'd like to also suggest that we have a cross-sports coaching conference to hear from those volunteers largely who are supporting our athletes, and also a basic commitment from local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Richard Lyle to be followed by Graham Pearson.
Presiding Officer, can I begin by welcoming the opportunity to debate this very positive issue of supporting a sporting nation, particularly as a member of the Health and Sports Committee in this Parliament. I want to begin my speech by looking at what sport means to people who take part in it. Sport is something that we all can do, be it a walk down the Royal Mile to Parliament in the morning, to a run round Strathclyde Park in Motherwell, or going to your local gym. The benefits of this type of sport and others can have and are numerous. Benefits such as improved physical and mental well-being, which has a number of positive knocks-on effects. The benefit of sport and leisure cannot be ignored, and I am delighted therefore to note that the Scottish Government will publish later in the year a youth sports strategy, which I hope will outline and enshrine the values and methods of sporting participation, which is so important to future generations. And actually, in the sunshine yesterday, my grandson actually was in a swimming pool, so it is happening, Alison. I would like at this point, Presiding Officer, to move to highlight 2 examples of good practice and hard work that is taking place within my region of Central Scotland. Firstly, the work done by Active Schools. The Active Schools network aims to improve motivation and attitudes amongst children and young people, and in doing so increase their achievements at school and their contribution to their community. And they do this, Presiding Officer, through sport and increased physical activity, which has the added effect of creating an increased number of young people becoming youth leaders. I believe that this initiative is an example of good practice in meeting one of the targets for not only the Scottish Government, but more generally this Parliament, and creating strong sporting foundations at preschool level and physical education provision in primary and secondary schools. My second example of good practice is that of the work of the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games Youth Legacy Ambassadors throughout Scotland, in particular the work of 6 North Lanarkshire ambassadors, Scott Lamond, April Crane, Craig Rutherford, Julie Dobbin, Stacey Smith and Jordan Linden, who are working hard to promote the themes of the legacy of the Glasgow 2014 Commonwealth Games, and indeed are ensuring that the message of healthy living and participation in sport as well as culture is promoted right now, in the run-up to the Games and indeed after the Games. I also note that the Ambassadors Scott Lamont and Jordan London opened the Get Active Lanarkshire event at Strathclyde Park last weekend, an event which aimed at promoting the Getting Active message to young people and indeed the people of Lanarkshire. The ambassador role is supported by the Scottish Government and the young Scot. I believe, Presiding Officer, that this highlights a commitment to ensuring that the Commonwealth Games are an outstanding success and there is a lasting legacy from Glasgow 2014. I also would like to take the opportunity to welcome the creation of community sports hubs in local authorities across the country. And a couple of weeks ago, in fact, I think it was last week, I complimented the Chief Executive of Sports Scotland in his desire, and I also complimented the Minister in the work that's been carried out and their vision for more. I want more sports hubs. There is one located within my area, but I would actually want more within the Bellsill area of my region, but I would like more. I note that often community sports facilities are now being built in conjunction with a new high school or a new primary school. I believe this idea to be a good one. It sets across a message to young people that from a grassroots level, sport and education, two cornerstones to a healthy lifestyle, are interlinked. I welcome the vision by the Scottish Government in creating at least 150 community sports hubs across all local authorities in Scotland, and believe that this action, along with others, will help to deliver a sporting legacy fit for a generation. Presiding Officer, I also note that Glasgow has placed a bid to host the Glasgow 2018 Youth Olympics and indeed has been shortlisted. I, along with others across this chamber, wait with excitement for the decision on the host city, which comes in 23 days' time. I'm backing that bid and I'm looking forward to hearing that decision, a decision which I hope will be in Glasgow's favour and continues Scotland's success. In closing, can I compliment all volunteers who take part in sport and the time they give to their sport, unpaid. Can I also compliment locally a boxing coach in my region, in particular in the Bellsill area, a chap called Jim Hughes, who regularly trains over 60 young people, girls and boys, and has given these young people self-esteem and has won various awards throughout the region. A number of years ago, I had the excitement of seeing my son play. He never liked football. He found his niche. He went into volleyball. He played for Scotland at Breda in Holland. We should encourage our children to participate in sport because that is what our children should do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call Graham Pearson to be followed by Christine Graham, and there is a little bit of time in hand for any interventions.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I speak in support of Patricia Ferguson's amendment to the motion being debated this afternoon. I also welcome the Minister's earlier commitment to build further the links between sports hubs and schools. Encouraging young people to participate in sport is not just about nurturing the star athletes of tomorrow. Getting children involved in sport in the long term ensures that we create healthier and happier society for us all. Unfortunately, Scotland has a reputation, whether fair or not, for an unhealthy lifestyle, particularly regarding food, alcohol, cigarettes and inactivity. With the 2012 Olympics still fresh in our minds, the Commonwealth Games and the Ryder Cup both coming to Scotland next year, there has never been a better opportunity to encourage young people to get involved in sport and enjoy a healthy life. As proposed in Scotland's 2011 manifesto, I believe this should start with ensuring that every pupil in Scotland enjoys at least 2 hours of physical education per week. I would welcome the Scottish Government delivering on its 2007 commitment to ensure that all pupils do receive 2 hours of PE every week and not, as in some sections, 2 periods. within secondary schools. I'm also disheartened by reports that 16% of primary schools are still not meeting their targets, and hopefully the Minister will make sure that this changes. I would like, however, to acknowledge that the Scottish Government's efforts to encourage young people to get active with the implementation of Take Life On scheme and the provision of free swimming lessons for pupils from deprived areas is a tremendous development. I think we can all agree that more can still be done. I believe the best and most effective way to increase youth participation in sport is to target support at schools, teachers, and, has been alluded to by earlier speakers, the very helpers who exist to support schools and teachers, often acting in a voluntary capacity. There are countless opportunities in schools to get pupils more involved in sport, both as part of the physical education curriculum and external sports teams and groups. The main barrier appears to be the lack of clear information about funding and a lack of support and guidance for teachers accessing that funding. I know from personal experience the costs involved simply to run school football teams are very significant. It can cost hundreds of pounds to hire transport weekly to attend games, and that doesn't take account of the cost of... I'm happy to do so.
Colin Keir.
Can I thank Mr Pearson for taking the intervention? I'd be interested to know Mr Pearson's thoughts with regards to some of the PPP contracts that were signed under the last Labour administrations, because we have a situation in Craigmont High School which was rebuilt under PPP, lost half its playing fields, and the one grass playing field that used to be a football pitch isn't kept to a sufficient standard because it is under the PPP contract as a green space. And as a result, that's what's in the contract. And as a result, they have to send their football teams, of which there are a few, to various centres around the city.
Graham Pearson.
Well, Mr Keir will not be surprised to know that I have very limited knowledge about the example that he gives. But I can tell him that right across Scotland, there are schools who utilise bus companies day and daily to go and play in away game scenarios and also receive teams from elsewhere at their home schools. And it's that cost that I was alluding to which have to be met by many, if not all, schools across Scotland. Teachers giving up their time voluntarily, those who run successful clubs and teams, are often the victims of their own success because cost and time commitments escalate due to their success. We must ensure that those teachers who are willing and able to provide pupils with opportunities to get involved in sport are sufficiently supported and encouraged. In many secondary schools, senior school leaders and senior school leavers could, and some currently do, play a part in motivating younger pupils in involvement in sport. And that's an issue that perhaps a minister could pay account to, and perhaps there's an opportunity there for senior school leavers to be employed on a part-time basis back in their home schools, assisting educators accordingly. If a child participates in 2 hours of PE each week, they're more likely to get involved in sports clubs and organisations outside the school. With more people working in office environments these days, while a reduction in exposure to dangerous and physical working conditions are obviously positive, it's ever more important that we ensure that people develop an active lifestyle which they can maintain throughout their adult life. This is illustrated by the fact that only 45% of men and 33% of women in Scotland currently meet the government's targets for a healthy level of physical activity. Participation in sport is about far more than ensuring our national teams can compete with the world's best. It allows children from all backgrounds to socialise together in a healthy, fun environment and improves social skills, reduces health risks, takes the pressure off our national health system, and it teaches discipline, teamwork and hard work for those who might otherwise fall outside the system. In conclusion, I would remind the Chamber, if it needs reminded, that there are hundreds and literally thousands of young people competing every week for the Cameroonian Cup, for the Scottish Shield, for the British Cup champions. And in addition, there are dance teams from every school in Scotland, with girls who participate in the Scottish National Dance Championships. These we should laud and should encourage for the future, and I look forward to a healthy future for Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And I now call Christine Graham.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, Minister, you must wonder why on earth I'm speaking in a debate on sport. So do I, and I'll tell you why later. Can I quote from the Scottish Sports Association saying, primarily sport is fun? I have to disagree. Sport is not fun, at least not for all of us. I'm not sports mad, not at all. It's well known that my DNA contains not one gene that's interested in sport. I don't even like watching it. I don't like listening to it. And that includes Wimbledon. So I'm a hard case, and there are quite a few of us about across the generations. In my youth, it didn't matter so much. We ran about the council scheme streets. We played peavers, skipping, climbed and balanced on high walls. We never heard of health and safety. We played statutes. We're out there doing 1, 2, 3 O'Leary with our tennis balls. I'll provide a glossary later. It was hard for my parents to reel me in at night to take me home. I wasn't sitting in a dark room exercising my digits, playing virtual games. I didn't know why adults were in the house at all. I was out running about the streets. But there are therefore huge issues for today's toddlers and school children. I prefer the word, and it's been slipping into the debate, activity to sport. And they're not the same, because sport for me was, as it often should be, competitive. But as someone who dropped her egg immediately at the start of the egg and spoon race, I soon lost interest in that competitive pursuit. This was compounded at the age of 11 and a half when a hockey stick hit my bare shin on an ice-cold day on a brick-hard pitch. That ended my interest in sport totally. But I danced competitively as a teenager and practiced days and days a week because I loved it. So I was fit, quite apart from those early activities in Scotland streets. So dancing, these things should be part of activity, not that word that some of us find such an anathema, sport. So while the Commonwealth Games, I am applauding the opportunity to try to endeavour to engage with our young people, I will say, as I have said before, that in the last session, when as chair of the Health and Sport Committee, how much I suited that role, we had no evidence whatsoever internationally that there was a lasting legacy from many international sporting competition. The example Patricia Ferguson gave of the temporary tennis bats on the streets at Wimbledon was exactly what we found, whether it was the Olympics in Australia or elsewhere. Anything was temporary. So I hope you break the mould, but it's not easy. Now, as you may have guessed, I'm a conscript in this debate and a sceptic, and I think that's a very healthy position to take. I want to see the Commonwealth Games cowping us out of our armchairs and sofas and into something, anything, that exercises our limbs. Patricia Ferguson has said, referred to activity. I think we should start using that word instead of just talking about sports. That'll put people off for a start. As for PE teachers, they have an important role to play. Mine, I got off to a really bad start with her, not surprisingly. I was asked to vault the horse, and I did. Then I propped myself on the wooden bars. When challenged to jump the vault again, I announced I'd already done it. Once was enough, I muttered under my breath. We went bad to worse after that. But the attitude of the gym teacher is very important to people like me. I was a bit of a snob in those days. I rated academic competitiveness or achievement way above physical prowess, and I was very wrong. But that was an attitude that I held. And I do agree with the Scottish Sports Association, having disagreed with them, that sport is fun when they say it can have a positive impact on academic performance. Here I mean activity, not sport. People like me will never, ever play a decent tennis game or table tennis. I was all right at skiing, but that was about the only thing. So if we're not going to be good at that, don't put us off by embracing us with this word sport. One thing I did do in the constituency, although I've been quite sceptical of everything, was I did hold a sports summit because I was concerned about, I just called it a sports summit because I like alliteration, was to find out how we made our pupils more active. And what I found out through engaging with, from Midlothian Council and Borders Council, sports coordinators, other agencies, the police had put in a submission, council and so on, was we had to talk about healthy eating at the same time. That what we were looking at was having children who were active, giving girls, adolescent girls, want to look pretty. They don't want to look sweaty on a hockey pitch, some of them. They want to look pretty and attractive. And so dancing could appeal to them, or doing aerobics or something like that. Now, I know this is, for others who are sporting here, it's difficult for them to understand that that's how many of us feel. Anyway, that's the way we're looking at it, but we're looking also engaging with local shops in producing the foods. There's no point in them having these activities at school and then going away and having a bag of chips on a roll. That's my contribution. That's what happens when you're a conscript. Thank you very much.
And that then brings us to the closing speeches of the debate. And I note that a couple of members who participated in the debate are missing at this point. All members who've spoken in the debate should be present for closing speeches. I call on Tavish Scott. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. Christine Graham gave us a litany of all the sporting and gym equipment she didn't like. I thought after her vote on courts this morning it was a high bar she should be more worried about, but maybe that's just for me. I must confess I sensed a slight frisson of, how would I put it delicately, atmosphere between Jenny Mara and the Minister on the front bench here in a number of interventions there. I sense I've fallen into a few political traps in my time, but I certainly sensed a political trap being laid by Jenny Mara for the Minister over the National Performance Centre for Sport. If the Minister's colleagues don't award it to Dundee, then Jenny Mara will no doubt slam the government for not doing that, and if they do award it, she'll undoubtedly take the credit, which is always the benefit of the great political traps of our day. But actually that did bring to mind the National Performance Centre for Sport and what an important project that is. And I actually rather agree with the Minister's point to one of the members who made, I think, the case for Largs, because it did strike me in looking at that the case for this centre being more than just football and actually covering a range of sports was the right approach for Scottish sport more generally. And I do believe that case is well proven. I have to confess I've been to Heriot Watt to see the bid that they have submitted and to be talked through that, and with Alison Johnson I find it, I must confess, pretty compelling. But in fairness, I don't know in any kind of detail the benefits of either the Dundee or Stirling bids, which I'm sure are equally strong. I guess that's ultimately one the government will make a decision on. But certainly on the principle of a National Performance Centre and on the principle of £25 million being invested for the long term in sport, I very much endorse the approach the government are taking in this area. Arguably, when you look internationally at what's been invested in different countries where, as others have said, we are a sport-mad country, they have been down this route over many years and across many sporting disciplines, and I do believe that's an important principle, an important practical measure that can help considerably. Just on Edinburgh, I must confess on youth sport, but on sport more generally, I do believe that bid at Riccarton would be stronger were some consideration being given to the stadium issue, which bedevils this city to this day. Stadiums matter, elite athletes matter more because they inspire young people, and we have heard about curling in this debate, we've heard about many different sporting figures, although I think there's been a very healthy concentration, possibly not on our well-known and exemplary elite athletes, but on actually many unsung heroes who support them and who support people at all levels. I must confess, just on the sporting theme, I sneaked a look at the British Lions this morning. Quite nice to see a young Hawick lad called Stuart Hogg playing fantastically well at fly half, indeed starring at fly half. He is certainly the epitome of youth sport and what a sports-mad or rugby-mad town Hawick is. On elite, I thought Alec Johnson raised an important issue about participation or activity, as other members have have also coined the phrase participation versus elite sport. And if we are to inspire the next generation, if we are to inspire more young people to follow different sporting disciplines or indeed take part in a range of them and then transfer into, decide which one they want to pursue. In short, we need a bit of both. But what does strike me, what really struck me about the Olympics was how much money went in from the National Lottery to deliver for sporting success, and how focused that whole funding stream was, both for young athletes coming through and then for more established elite athletes, how focused that was on success, that there was no room, if you pardon the phrase, for failure. Sports that didn't match up to the targets that had been agreed were simply had their funding reduced. And irrespective of how this develops in the future, there is a challenge in Scotland as to how we do that, because that lottery funding on a UK-wide basis is fundamentally important to how many young Scots then can make it. Now that debate, the one that Alec Johnson... Surely, yeah.
Minister?
If the member is aware that one of the difficulties with the current arrangements of funding through UK sport is that the swimming team, for example, a very strong Scottish performance in the Olympic team, and of course very strong performance hopefully next year. But of course that wasn't necessarily recognised when it came to deciding which sports had been successful or otherwise at the Olympics.
Tavish Scott.
Not running down what Team GB achieved, because for me the great success, as Sir Chris Hoy put it, people can shake their heads on the nationalist benches if they want to, but the point that Sir Chris Hoy made, since the ministers raised this issue, the point that Sir Chris Hoy and other great Scottish Olympians made was that they got where they were and achieved so much for Scotland and for Team GB by the sports funding that came into their sports. Chris Hoy has said he wouldn't have achieved all he achieved had he not been training in Manchester on a very regular basis. And I just hope those who want to separate us away from all that don't just dismiss that argument lightly. I think it's a serious point. I think if you talk to anyone seriously in athletics, they think it's a serious point too. I note it gets dismissed on my left, but I think it's people need to go and talk to those who are involved in athletics to understand the point.
Tricia Ferguson.
Would the member also agree with me that it's quite significant that a number of the gold medals won by Scottish athletes were won when they were part of a Team GB team in a particular sporting event or category?
Tavish Scott.
I think it's disappointing that again you hear voices from the left criticising that. Catherine Granger wouldn't have won her gold medal had she not been competing in the way in which she did with another athlete from another part of the UK. It's a statement of fact and she's said it. So let's recognise that. I do also want to take up the point from young athletes, young sports people, and indeed schools, from those of us who have to travel from the far-flung parts of Scotland. I heard one of the members saying that she was concerned about being 40 minutes from Glasgow. Well, that's pretty close from my perspective. But the other side to that is that if you come from Shetland or Orkney, the Scottish Government have just cut the funding that's available for group discounts on our vessels, on our way of getting to Aberdeen and then into sports on the mainland. They just cut that. So it's all very well talking up all these other funds, but at the same time, government then cuts a really important fund which helps swimmers, fencers, football teams and schools to take part in sport across Scotland. And I think that is profoundly wrong. I hope when the Cabinet visits Lerwick in July, they'll change that policy and instead have a rather better one. But what I wanted to finish with was the very fair point that I think Richard Lyle finished up with on volunteering, because to me the essence of volunteering, to me the essence of so many mums and dads who spend so much time driving, encouraging, cajoling and indeed dealing with the tantrums when an event, a game or a match is lost, seems to me the essence of sport, and it's why for so many of us we're just delighted to be part of it.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Nanette Milne. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. This has been an interesting and informative debate, and on the whole consensual. Many members have cited local examples of the importance of sport for our country as a whole, and the need to involve people early in the many sports played across the land, from football to curling to ice hockey to volleyball and others, and all have stressed the importance of regular physical activity throughout life. Alison Johnston was right to highlight the social and psychological benefits of taking part in sport, the learning of discipline, of how to get on with teammates and the mental relaxation that comes with physical activity. I applaud her ambitions to take part in the athletic events mentioned by Bob Doris, and I'm just sorry that my colleague Liz Smith can't be here today to talk about her cricketing prowess and the regular coaching work which she still does with young people, encouraging and training them in her sport. I'm not sure what active sport my colleague Alec Johnson does these days, but he was a bit of a legend in rugby circles in Aberdeenshire in his youth, when he was not only tall, but of a very slender physique. Deputy Presiding Officer, I told him I was going to say that. Deputy Presiding Officer, yesterday I had the privilege of attending the installation of Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Rothesay as Chancellor of Aberdeen University. During the ceremony, 6 honorary degrees were awarded, one of which was an honorary doctorate for the great cycling athlete Neil Fahey. Members may be aware that Neil, a science graduate of Aberdeen University, came to prominence at the 2008 Paralympics in Beijing, when he competed in athletics before turning to cycling. Neil has the congenital eye condition retinitis pigmentosa, but despite this disability, he's gone from strength to strength, culminating in winning 4 gold medals for Britain, breaking 2 world records and becoming the first Scot in the Paralympics GB team to win a gold medal at London 2012. Since then, he's become a regular ambassador for sport in schools across the country, a proud representative indeed for Aberdeen, for Scotland and for the UK. So when we're discussing sport, as others have rightly said, we must not confine ourselves to only the able-bodied. And we must not ignore the influence that the role models like Neil Fahey can have on young people. Like Patricia Ferguson, I hope that sport for people with disabilities will feature in the forthcoming youth sports strategy. Like all of us in the Chamber, I watched with great enthusiasm last year's Olympics and Paralympics and was overwhelmed by the sense of occasion and by the unifying impact it had on our nation as a whole. Similarly, I too look forward to next year's Commonwealth Games, and I very much support the part of the Minister's motion which backs Glasgow's bid for the Youth Olympics in 2018. As members are aware, the Health and Sport Committee recently carried out an inquiry into support for community sport, and I would urge any member who hasn't done so already to read our comprehensive report, which was published earlier in the year. A clear finding of the inquiry was that what we require from the forthcoming Commonwealth Games, which is estimated will be watched by a worldwide audience of over 1 billion people, is a genuine and lasting sporting legacy. And ideally, that will be a nation whose young people are physically active and regularly participating in sport. People of all abilities, ages and backgrounds must be encouraged to participate and to volunteer in community sport, and they should begin as young as possible. Witness after witness in our inquiry stressed the importance of volunteers to every sport, referring to them again and again as the lifeblood of sporting activity, without whom many sports clubs would not survive. And as we know, many of them are parents. From making the tea, washing strips after the game, raising necessary funds, coaching team members, the activities are legion. Volunteers are essential and we need more of them. So it is vital that the Commonwealth Games are not confined to 2 weeks of entertainment. And I was encouraged to hear from the Minister last week some of the detail as to how the government intends to encourage more volunteers into sport beyond 2014, as it's clear that barriers to volunteering still do remain. From our inquiry, many people felt that they do not have the skills or the time to become involved, and others suggested they would volunteer if they were asked, but they did need to be assured of an enjoyable experience. People need to be given the right training, and I agree with Judy Murray, who gave evidence to us when she said that there's an attraction of an inexperienced coach learning from an expert, akin to an apprentice learning from a master. And I would urge the Minister to look at this when formulating the sports strategy. As someone with a health background, I naturally hope the most important legacy which will come from Glasgow 2014 is the improved physical health of our people, and that has to start with our young people. I fully endorse the vision of the Scottish Sports Association that all children should have the right to be physically literate and that their early education should help them to become regular participants in sport and physical activity. It is, of course, very concerning that the 2012 Growing Up in Scotland report noted that 22% of 6-year-olds are classed as overweight or obese, which, of course, often leads to other health problems like type 2 diabetes, hypertension and various forms of cancer. Therefore, we need to get our young people moving, and that mobility does need to continue throughout life, right into extreme old age. My colleague Alex Johnson, in his amendment, has rightly expressed his concern, which many of us in the Chamber share, that despite the pledge made over 5 years ago, the Government has yet to deliver access for school children to 2 hours of quality PE each week. Patricia Ferguson's amendment recognises the need for quality sporting facilities to encourage people into sport and to maintain their interest. This was brought home to me when the Health and Sport Committee visited the splendid sports village in Aberdeen, which is very well used by those who access it. But it was pointed out to us that there are several communities in the city who cannot do so for various reasons, and that these communities also need good sporting facilities if they are to be encouraged to take up sports. I am therefore very supportive of the Community Sports Hub concept, where particularly educational facilities can be available to local people out with school hours. And it is encouraging that the school estate across Scotland is gradually opening up for community use, although there's still a way to go. Finally, Presiding Officer, we on this side do welcome the Government's commitment to publishing a youth strategy if it goes some way to addressing the concerns raised in this chamber today. It ought to set out where we progress from here, and I look forward to seeing the meat put on the bones when it comes out in September. No doubt this is an important area which we will return to in due course. Presiding Officer will be supporting the motion in Shona Robson's name and all 3 amendments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Mark Griffin. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As raised by a number of members, Scotland is often tagged as the sick man of Europe. We have amongst the worst levels of obesity in the developed world, and the increase in physical activity is key to improving the health of the people of our nation and providing our young people with a better chance for a healthier life. Figures suggest that just under 2,500 people in Scotland die prematurely every year as a consequence of physical inactivity. Heart disease, stroke, colon cancer and non-insulin diabetes could be significantly reduced if activity was increased, something confirmed by Chief Medical Officer Harry Burns, who said improving physical activity, even by a small proportion, will reduce levels of heart attack and stroke. Over the course of the last few years, Scotland has hosted and participated in some once-in-a-lifetime sporting events. North and South Lanarkshire Councils hosted the 45th International Children's Games in 2011, with 1,300 competitors and coaches representing 77 cities from 33 countries worldwide, making their way to the Central Belt. The world's eyes were fixed on London last year as Scottish athletes, as part of Team GB, achieved mighty feats at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And we can also look forward to Glasgow hosting the Commonwealth Games in 2014, which will bring athletes from across the globe to Scotland. And I'm sure we all hope that Glasgow is successful again in its bid for the 2018 Youth Olympics, and I'm sure we will send our full support for the bid from the Chamber this afternoon. Now, these events capture the heart of the nation, and figures show that thousands of Scots, young and old, increased their activity post-Olympics, whether it be swimming, cycling or simply going to the gym. And it's our challenge to make sure that that increased activity is maintained beyond the honeymoon period after the Games. One of the best ways of driving up the levels of physical activity is through that culture of regular exercise and participation in sport. Our schools play a key part in that, getting our young people interested in a variety of different sports from an early age, and sustaining their interest can fight significantly the challenges we face. As a councillor in North Lanarkshire, I saw firsthand the excellent work of the council in trying to involve as many young people as possible in a wide variety of sports through their Active Schools network. The 23 Active Schools coordinators work closely with the schools and try to improve the physical activity of all children and young people, and that's crucial because there are hard-to-reach groups across Scotland, as raised by Patricia Ferguson and Nanette Milne, and I'm pleased that councils like North Lanarkshire are taking a targeted approach to attracting more girls and young women, young people with disabilities and young people from ethnic minority backgrounds to increase their participation in sports. I've also had the privilege to go back to my old school, St Maurice's in Cumbernauld. The school is a sports comprehensive, encompassing the motto of raising achievement for all, recognising, as many members have, that education is not just about academic successes, and uses sport to build self-confidence, improve attendance levels and increase attainment. Now, the reason I've been able to go back every year, amongst other visits, is because the school already hosts an annual school sports awards ceremony. That's St Maurice's clearly blazing that trail, and the talents of young people from across the school are celebrated, from football to badminton, volleyball to netball, rugby to basketball, as well as gymnastics, table tennis, swimming, dance and dodgeball. The school also encourages young people to participate in the Community Sports Leader Award programme, and a number of senior school pupils, staff, former pupils and club and community coaches are involved delivering high quality sport within the school. A key element of that programme as well is that students also use their time in achieving their qualifications by delivering sports coaching to pupils in the primary schools, who then feed into the secondary schools, really taking that sports coaching down to the earliest possible level. As important as schools are in developing our young people and getting them interested in sport, so much work is done by volunteers in clubs across the country. There are 150,000 adults who volunteer in sport on a regular basis, coaching young people and helping them hone their skills and generating that passion for the sport, as Alison Johnson mentioned. These volunteers play an essential role in developing Scotland's future sportsmen and women and improving the health of the nation. It's important then that the Scottish Government and Sport Scotland do all they can to break down some of the barriers facing volunteers. The Scottish Sports Association Manifesto for Sport in Scotland highlights the many difficulties volunteers have with disclosure checks. In the past, many organisations and individuals have highlighted the time it takes for disclosure applications to be accepted and certificates to arrive through the cross-party group on sport. Now, that can result in many volunteers having to wait considerable periods before they can commence their work, and it creates the very real possibility that many volunteers will be put off. Now, no one disagrees that disclosure checks are essential for working with vulnerable groups, but the length of time taken for Disclosure Scotland to approve volunteers could reduce the number of volunteers available and so hamper the opportunities for young people to get interested in that wide range of sports that is essential. I would agree with Joan McAlpine that exactly that wide range of sports is needed, but I would contend with the fact that the southwest of Scotland is possibly the birthplace of curling. Certainly Kilsyth stake a claim to be the birthplace of curling. We have our curling pond, and we've even named a pub the Curling Stone after our fine curling traditions. So perhaps I'll go back to the historians in Kilsyth and just ask them to check their sources. That support for volunteers to access, to speed up that application process for disclosure checks also extends to the point raised earlier about supporting volunteers to apply for grants. In clubs across the country, often the clubs who receive the investment are the people who have skills in completing the grant application forms. So it would be beneficial for volunteers to be offered that kind of training to make sure that that grant support is spread as widely as possible. I would agree with my colleague Patricia Ferguson on the points raised through the Cashback for Communities initiative. I feel that sometimes this cash is spread uniformly across Scotland rather than actually targeted in the areas where the money actually, the crime which most affects the community comes from. This would have a double impact if it was invested in the areas where the crime originated, as it would act as a diversionary measure to make sure that the youngsters weren't carrying on in that cycle. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would welcome the Government's plans to produce a youth sports strategy, and I'm sure the Minister will agree with me that it must recognise the challenges that we face, the challenges that members have highlighted this afternoon, and also reflects the tremendous opportunity we have here in Scotland with the many sporting events coming up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Shona Robertson to wind up the debate. Minister, you have until just before 5.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I first of all welcome the positive contributions across the chamber, maybe with one exception, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Patricia Ferguson, I should have said at the start, of course, we accept the amendment in the name of Patricia Ferguson. I think it very much adds to the motion. She talked about how to harness motivation and to make sure that we continue that through beyond the Games next year. And I think hopefully I managed to answer a little bit of that with my opening remarks, but I think it is very important that we remain focused on that. She also raised the issue of school pupils with a disability. Now, we have been supporting SDS to roll out measures to improve the delivery of sport for children with disabilities. I very much agree with members that that has to be included within the youth sport strategy, and we will of course ensure that it does. Alex Johnson, all I'm going to say, apart from maybe he got out of bed the wrong side this morning, is that, you know, I can understand Alex Johnson coming here and criticising our delivery on PE, was it not for the fact that his government had dropped the target entirely in 2010. We haven't done that. We have said we will deliver it, and we will deliver it by next year. However, as many have said, it's not the be-all and end-all. We absolutely agree with that, but it is a part of the jigsaw that is important to ensuring that children are active every day of the week, and the school environment has an important contribution to make. Tavish Scott mentioned the Audit Committee's comments on the report's comments on legacy. What I would say about that is the Commonwealth Games Federation Coordination Commission did highlight the legacy plans and actually described them as world leading and a blueprint for future games. And that's not to be complacent, and because we're not complacent, but I think there is something in the way that legacy has been built into everything we do from the moment that the bid was won that is hopefully something that future hosts will be able to take forward. The comments from Aileen MacLeod about the active games going on in her area, I think, are a good example of improving the quality of competitive school sport, and that's something that we want to feature within the youth sport strategy as well, because I think there is room for improvement. I'm happy to take up the invitation she offered, diary permitting. Margaret McDougall talked about the legacy requiring to extend beyond Glasgow. I agree with that. I want to see a legacy for the whole of Scotland. What I would say is that, I think to imply that the west of Scotland hasn't received substantial investment in sports facilities might be stretching it a bit far. I don't think that can be said to be the case at all. But there's always more to be done, and I want to make sure, whether it's North Ayrshire or any other part of Scotland, that it will have a genuine legacy from the Games and beyond. I agree with her point about social enterprise. I think there's huge opportunities for social enterprise in sport, and there's some really good examples of where that's happened, but of course I think there's always more we can do. Bob Doris championed the case for the World Masters in 2021. Number of members declaring they would take part is very impressive. I think his reference to the 24 projects funded through the Active Places Fund is also important, because I think that gives a very concrete example of how legacy is being delivered through a number of communities, through that very much that community-based fund to improve community sports facilities the length and breadth of Scotland. Jenny Mara quite rightly praised the efforts of Dundee City Council, and I certainly wouldn't take any issue with that whatsoever. I think the only issue I would take up with her in her contribution was that she implied that there had been little or no investment in sports facilities in Dundee today, and to date, and that is just not the case. And I just want to take the opportunity to perhaps highlight the new multi-million-pound Olympia with competition quality swimming facilities, which is of course about to open, the new world-class gymnastics centre, the new hockey pitches and 3G pitches at Disk, the new outdoor velodrome in Caird Park, to name but a few. And the reason that's important is, of course, that Dundee, as many cities in Scotland, are looking to host the pre-Games training camps, and I wouldn't want their portfolio of excellent facilities to be in any way undermined, because it's important that they are able to promote that. Joan McAlpine quite rightly highlighted curling and its success, and we have to make sure, of course, that we have regard to our traditional sports, although there seems to be a bit of rivalry opening up about who has the strongest links, which area has the strongest links to curling. What I would say is, of course, as well as wishing the team, Eve Muirhead and the team, good luck in Sochi, that I think there will be opportunities to develop our curling tradition and support for curling within Scotland. Alison Johnson talked about the power of sport to young people and making sure that young people themselves are involved in the development of the youth sports strategy. I can assure Alison Johnson that the Young People's Panel will do just that. They are going to be going out and talking to young people about what young people want to see in that strategy, and that is very important indeed. Graham Pearson talked about senior school leaders and leavers. I think it's very important that senior pupils within schools are involved in leadership roles. I think it gives them fantastic skill development for the future. And of course, many of them are already recruited into sport coaching roles. However, he may be interested, of course, in the recent announcement of the expansion of the modern apprenticeships in sport and the leisure sector, because I think that does create some real opportunities for young school leavers who have an interest in sport. Christine Graham, what can I say? She actually had a very similar experience of hockey that I did, but the fact that she was a dancer, we've yet to see perhaps that in action, but I think there's always time for that. But she did highlight the fact that dance is has an appeal to girls, and for me it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's dance or whether it's hockey. I've always said, as long as it gets young people hot and sweaty and active, then that does it for me. The sports summit that she mentioned, just wipe that thought from your mind. Wipe that thought from your mind. The sports summit that she was talking about, and the
chamber's far too noisy.
The healthy eating information is very, very important. It isn't just about sport, it's about everything that goes with sport in terms of a healthy lifestyle. Tavish Scott, in his closing remarks, talked about Olympic funding. What I would say is this: I think we should remember that Scotland already contributes towards the Olympic funding structure and to UK sport. And as is always the case, our athletes will go wherever they should go to train. They will go to the best facilities all over the world, and the funding will follow the athlete to do that. That is the case now, and it will be the case after independence as well. I can give Tavish Scott that assurance. Nanette Milne talked about passing on the experience of coaches to less experienced coaches. I think that's a very important point as well. Mark Griffin reminded us of the International Children's Games and the legacy from that. I think that having attended that event was another great example of Scotland's capacity to attract some fantastic events to our country. I can only agree with him that I hope that we'll see that long and growing list of major sporting events that we have managed to attract to Scotland be added to by the full support of the Chamber in hoping that our Youth Olympic bid has all the success next month in Lausanne. And thank you very much for all your contributions.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate on supporting a sporting nation, celebrating and building... Order, please. Supporting a sporting nation, celebrating and building on Scotland's success in youth sport. And it is now time to move on to our next item of business. The next item of business is consideration of motion number 6924 in the name of Alex Neil on the legislative consent motion Marriage, Same-Sex Couples Bill, United Kingdom legislation. I call on Alex Neil to speak briefly to the motion and to move the motion. Cabinet Secretary.
Formally moved, Presiding Officer.
Question on this motion will be put at decision time, to which we are just about to come. And when we do come to decision time, there will be 5 questions which will be put as a result of today's business. And there will be no preemptions on any of the questions at decision time, to which we are now going to come. Sorry. We are now at decision time, and the first question is at Amendment 6921.2 in the name of Patricia Ferguson, which seeks to amend motion number 6921 in the name of Shona Robison on supporting a sporting nation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is therefore agreed. The second question is that Amendment 6921.3 in the name of Alex Johnston, which seeks to amend motion number 6921 in the name of Shona Robison on supporting a sporting nation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote, and members should cast their votes now, please. The result of the vote on Amendment 6921.3 is yes 41, no 58. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. The next question is at Amendment 6921.1 in the name of Tavish Scott, which seeks to amend motion number 6921 in the name of Shona Robison on supporting a sporting nation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The amendment is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion 6921 in the name of Shona Robison as amended on supporting a sporting nation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The fifth question is that motion 6924 in the name of Alex Neil on Marriage, Same-Sex Couples Bill UK legislation be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to, and that concludes decision time. And we will now move on to members' business. Could members who are leaving the chamber please do so as quietly as possible?